Chapter 1, Grown tired the night was heavy, and silver lightning, like a sharp blade, tore open the darkness. It also illuminated the woman standing before the villa's French windows. Phoebe Ashton's heart trembled. She touched the sandalwood beads on her wrist, picked up her phone, and dialed Sebastian Sterling's number. On the third try, it finally connected. The other end of the line was noisy. Phoebe sounded aggrieved. "Seb, why aren't you home yet?" In an exclusive club, Sebastian Sterling glanced at his watch and replied nonchalantly, "I might not be back tonight." Anyone would know it was an excuse, but Phoebe was persistent. "Then, when will you be back?" "I'll wait for you." Before she could finish, the call was abruptly disconnected. Sebastian tossed his phone onto the table, finding Phoebe annoying and oblivious. Yet, deep down, there was a faint, secret thrill of being needed. It was so fleeting Sebastian didn't quite grasp it, but the annoyance in his eyes was undisguised. Jasper York saw this and chuckled. Well, Seb, looks like Phoebe's checking up on you. She cares a lot, doesn't she?" Sebastian glanced up at him, his tone sharp. "A woman who only exists by clinging to a man, what right does she have to check up on me?" The others exchanged glances and fell silent. Phoebe's family, the Ashtons, were from an old, established lineage, but they had been on a decline in recent years. But ultimately, this was Sebastian's private family matter. He could say what he liked, but they had no right to comment. Sebastian saw through their expressions, found it dull, and stood up. "I'm leaving." Half an hour later, Sebastian stood at his front door. As he keyed in the passcode, an image of Phoebe bustling in the kitchen, making him hangover soup, flashed through his mind. The door opened, and the woman, her eyes instantly lighting up with a smile, came to greet him. "You're back. There's hangover soup on the table." Predictable. Sebastian looked at the bowl of soup on the table, then at the woman before him, scoffed, and walked straight into the bathroom. He didn't see that behind him, the light in Phoebe's face drained away, leaving her looking like an abandoned little animal. Under the shower, Sebastian's handsome face was indifferent. This monotonous life, this unchanging Phoebe, it was so damn boring. He remembered when they first married, what had attracted him to Phoebe were her lively, deer-like eyes. But now, only 3 years into the marriage, Sebastian was already tired of it. That initial affection had long since faded into insipidity. The sound of the shower stopped. Phoebe instinctively looked over, only to see the man walking straight to the bedroom. She hurried forward, somewhat at a loss, and said, "Seb, Mom and Dad want us to come over for dinner tomorrow." "Your parents or mine?" Sebastian looked down at her, his voice flat. Phoebe's expression faltered, and Sebastian knew. He raised an eyebrow. This time, what is it the Ashtons want? A piece of land, or are they being squeezed by some company again? Phoebe looked mortified. She clutched at his bathrobe, her voice laced with humility and pleading. "Seb, my parents. Maybe they just want to have dinner with you." Sebastian remained unmoved, his eyes cold, even a little disdainful. Phoebe's head gradually drooped. "I understand. I'll tell them we're not going." Sebastian made a noncommittal sound, pulled his bathrobe free, and headed into the bedroom. He'd had a bit to drink tonight, strong stuff, and he soon fell asleep. After a short while, Phoebe tiptoed in. Seeing Sebastian asleep, she carefully lay down, gently resting her head on his chest. Listening to his steady heartbeat, Phoebe slowly intertwined her fingers with Sebastian's. Her voice was as low as a sigh. "Seb, I don't ask for much. Just stay with me a little longer, that's all." Chapter 2, Where's Your Self-Respect? The wind howled outside. Phoebe tossed and turned restlessly, seeking comfort, but only touched a cold emptiness beside her and was instantly awake. Sebastian had already left. The phone on the nightstand buzzed. It was a call from her family. Phoebe hesitated before answering. "It's almost 11, why haven't you brought Seb back yet?" Eleanor Ashton's voice was demanding as soon as the call connected. Phoebe said, "Mom," then fell silent, unsure what to say. Eleanor Ashton understood immediately, her tone shifting sharply. "Phoebe Ashton, you can't even handle this simple thing. How did I end up with such a useless thing like you?" Eleanor Ashton berated her and then hung up. Phoebe listlessly put down her phone, watching the screen slowly go dark, a bitter taste on her tongue. She slowly hugged her knees. The warmth in the bed gradually faded. Suddenly, her chest tightened. Her breathing became rapid, but she struggled to draw air into her lungs. Her illness was acting up again. Phoebe clutched her chest with one hand and fumbled for her phone with the other, managing only to press his number, her emergency contact. "Seb, answer the phone, save me." This was Phoebe's only thought. At the office, Sebastian pulled out his phone and glanced at it. Then, he expressionlessly declined the call. These days, he only found Phoebe's dependence on him tiresome. Phoebe watched, wide-eyed, as the call was rejected. For a moment, she couldn't tell which was worse, the pain of suffocation or the stabbing ache in her heart. She didn't know how much time had passed before she suddenly started coughing violently, finally able to draw breath again. She had pulled through once more. After resting in bed for a while, Phoebe struggled to get up, dressed, and took a cab to the hospital. The hospital doctor saw it was her and sighed inwardly. Another episode. Phoebe nodded lightly, her once bright eyes now clouded as if by a haze. She asked, "How much time do I have left?" "Yours is a hereditary illness. There's not much we can do. At most, 3 years at least." 1 year? Phoebe was silent for a long time before speaking, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." She walked out, not knowing where to go. She sat on an empty bench by the wall, gazing blankly at the people bustling in the corridor. As she watched, her eyes inexplicably began to burn. So envious? They're sick too, but everyone else seems to have someone with them. If only someone could be with her. Even just a hug would be nice. She sat there numbly for a long time, until dusk fell, before Phoebe finally went home. Night had fallen, the house was empty and cold. She turned on the TV, the lively dialogue at least made the space feel less desolate. The clock struck 12. Worried about Sebastian, Phoebe dialed his number again. "The number you have dialed is unavailable." Call after call went unanswered, making Phoebe increasingly anxious. She called Jasper York and learned Sebastian was drunk, so she hurriedly left the house. Braving the cold winter night wind, she rushed to the address Jasper had given her. Phoebe pushed open the door and entered. A wave of warm air and noisy chatter washed over her. Everyone in the private room looked over, and a hush fell. Phoebe froze, then lowered her head and shuffled towards the man in the center of the crowd, his eyes hazy with drink. "Seb, I'm here to take you home." Phoebe gently took his hand and spoke softly. Her cold hand made Sebastian look up. Seeing it was Phoebe, the undisguised impatience in his eyes stabbed at her heart. The next second, Sebastian shook off her hand, his voice annoyed. "Who told you to come?" "Go home." Phoebe's heart trembled. She pressed her lips together but stubbornly held onto Sebastian's hand. "I'm taking you home." Sebastian clicked his tongue, his drunken eyes staring at her for a few seconds. Suddenly, he leaned in close, his voice playful yet sarcastic. "Phoebe Ashton, do you have any self-respect at all, huh?" In that instant, Phoebe stood there, completely stunned. Jasper sensed the tension between them and quickly interjected. "Phoebe, Seb's had too much to drink. You should take him home." Phoebe snapped back to reality and said softly, "Thank you." Then someone came over and helped her get Sebastian out of the private room. Sebastian had closed his eyes. It was hard to tell if he was drunk or just pretending. And the ache in her heart, it was impossible to describe how painful it was. It was 1:30 in the morning by the time Phoebe helped Sebastian onto the bed. On the bed, Sebastian unconsciously tugged at his collar, seeming very uncomfortable. Phoebe leaned over to unbutton it, but the next second she froze. Sebastian, in his drunken stupor, murmured, "Bianca." Chapter 3, "Who are you?" For a moment, Phoebe found it hard to breathe. Her heart sank, an endless, bottomless descent. She stood by the bed for a long time before continuing to tidy up. After finishing, Phoebe got into bed, her eyes fixed on the sleeping man beside her. Her heart began to ache, a delayed reaction. "Seb, why have we come to this?" At 6 in the morning, Phoebe got up as usual to prepare Sebastian's breakfast, as if nothing had happened yesterday. At 7, Sebastian walked into the dining room, pressing his temples. Catching sight of Phoebe's pale face, he frowned deeply. "Phoebe Ashton, looking like that first thing in the morning, don't you look in the mirror to see how frightening you are?" Phoebe looked up. The disgust on the man's face was plain to see. A lump formed in her throat, and she hastily lowered her head. "Seb, I'm not feeling well." "If you're sick, go to the hospital and get it treated early," Sebastian said impatiently, averting his gaze. With that, he picked up his coat and left. Phoebe stared blankly at his disappearing back. After a long while, she said in a hoarse voice, "Seb, I did go. The doctor said, I'm going to die." There was no response from the air around her. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Phoebe answered it to Alina Ashton's cold command. "Come home this morning." Before she could say anything, the call was disconnected. Phoebe opened her contacts, stared at Sebastian's number for a moment, and finally turned off the screen. She went back to the Ashton house alone. Just as she pushed open the door, a slap landed on her face. Phoebe's head snapped to the side from the force. Alina Ashton was furious. "Tell me, why did young Master Sterling give the Southside business to the White family?" Her ears ringing, all she could see were the impatient and blaming stares of the other Ashtons. A chill went through Phoebe's heart, and she began to tremble uncontrollably. Alina Ashton snatched her bag, rummaged through it for her phone, and poked her with it. "Call young Master Sterling." Phoebe kept her head turned away, silent. Alina Ashton grew even angrier. "You won't call, huh? I'll do it." She found Sebastian's name, pressed call, then slammed the phone against Phoebe's face. The cold device struck her cheek, forcing Phoebe to stumble backward. Each step felt like she was on the edge of an abyss, with no one to pull her back. Meanwhile, Sebastian glanced at his lit-up screen, his arm around a woman's waist, and scoffed before looking away. Bianca White, however, asked, "Is that Miss Ashton calling?" Sebastian didn't answer, turning over and pulling her beneath him. The call remained unanswered. Alina Ashton, furious, swung her hand and slapped Phoebe again, both ears ringing. Phoebe kept her head down as Alina Ashton dragged her by the hair to the door and shoved her out. "Phoebe Ashton, you can't even handle a man. What was the use of raising you? I'm warning you, if you don't bring young Master Sterling back this weekend, you'll regret it." The Ashton family's iron gate slammed shut with a clang. Phoebe stood there for a long while before she could finally hear the sounds of the outside world again. She blinked, her nose stinging terribly, but the tears had long since dried up. Leaving the Ashton house, Phoebe wandered aimlessly, stopping in front of a movie theater sign in the town square. She suddenly remembered that when she and Sebastian first got together, he loved bringing her to places like this. Back then, he would always say with a smile, "My cotton blossom, you're too quiet. I'll take you somewhere with more life." Actually, she wasn't quiet, her world was just too cold. And Sebastian had forcibly broken into her world, becoming her only warmth. The noisy chatter around her interrupted Phoebe's memories. The slap marks on her face, her hair disheveled like weeds, drew unavoidable, strange glances. Words like psycho, madwoman from God knows where flooded Phoebe's ears, momentarily transporting her back to her youth. Phoebe fled in panic, found a deserted corner and squatted down, her whole body trembling. This time, she dialed Sebastian's number herself. The call was answered quickly, and a joyful light filled Phoebe's eyes. But before she could speak, she heard a woman's voice on the other end. "Hello, who is this, please?" Phoebe froze, instinctively checking her phone, thinking she'd misdialed. But the next moment, Sebastian's familiar voice came through, husky and lazy, as if he'd just woken up. "What's wrong?" The phone slipped from Phoebe's hand, clattering to the ground with a thud. Chapter 4. "Of course I love you, Sebastian," snatched the phone from Bianca White's hand. Seeing the disconnected call on the screen, his face instantly turned cold. "If you ever do something like this again, you don't need to stay here." After speaking coldly, Sebastian ignored her and walked out of the bedroom. He looked at the name, Phoebe Ashton, on the screen, his brow furrowed. If nothing was wrong, she usually wouldn't call him at this hour. He tried calling back, but no one answered. After the call automatically disconnected, Sebastian sat on the sofa, a trace of irritation in his expression. After a moment, he tossed the phone aside, muttering sarcastically to himself, HMPH, clueless. He felt he owed nothing in this marriage. Phoebe not answering the phone was just another annoying tantrum. But after some thought, Sebastian decided to go home anyway. In the square, Phoebe picked up the cracked screen phone with a hand that was numb with cold. The hole in her heart felt too cold from the wind blowing through it. She stood up and looked ahead. Beyond the corner, the lights by Yeru Le were bright and the crowds bustled. Corrected to. Beyond the corner, the lights were bright and the crowds bustled. She recoiled as if burned, her feet rooted to the spot, unable to move an inch. Suddenly, an ill-intentioned voice called out from behind her. "Hey, beautiful, what are you doing here all alone?" A strong smell of alcohol approached as several men, who had been eyeing Phoebe for a while, surrounded her. Those disgusting gazes instantly transported Phoebe back to her girlhood. A wire snapped in her mind, and she screamed, "Don't come near me, don't touch me," before the men could react. The woman, who had seemed as timid as a rabbit, bolted as if she'd seen a ghost. Shoving past them and running out, Phoebe rushed onto the street, no longer able to care about the stares of passers-by. Voices echoed crazily in her ears. "Phoebe Ashton, you're just an unwanted psycho, a madwoman. I'm not sick, don't treat me like this." Phoebe muttered to herself, frantically fumbling for her phone to call Sebastian. But the phone was dead. Her eyes were red with anxiety, but she didn't hear the crowd's gasps. The next moment, Phoebe felt a sharp pain, and then her whole body pitched forward uncontrollably. Then, everything went black. When she woke up again, Phoebe blinked, disoriented by the pungent smell of disinfectant. "Phobes, you're finally awake," Liam Linden said, his voice full of pleasant surprise. Phoebe turned her head, asking slowly, "Liam, what are you doing here?" Liam Linden was her only friend from the countryside where the Ashtons had sent her. But since marrying Sebastian, their contact had dwindled. Liam Linden said, "The hospital couldn't reach your family. Somehow, they ended up calling me." His words made Phoebe's eyes dim. She stared straight at the ceiling, her face a mixture of tears and laughter. After a long while, her gaze fell on her casted right leg, her voice hoarse and empty. "Liam, am I really that terrible? Even when I get into a car accident, nobody cares." "Phobes, you shouldn't be living like this," Liam said, his eyes filled with pain. "If you're willing, I'll take you away." Just then, the door was suddenly pushed open. Sebastian's cold voice cut in, "She's not going anywhere without my permission." Liam Linden didn't back down, retorting sarcastically, "President Sterling, are you done with your business? Finally remembered you have a wife? Liam, don't say any more. You should go home first." Phoebe tugged at his sleeve, speaking urgently. Liam Linden pressed his lips together but ultimately said nothing and left. Only the couple remained in the hospital room. Phoebe looked at Sebastian, suddenly unsure what to say. Sebastian, however, walked closer, tossed a phone in front of her, and accused her. "Look at what you did last night, running around like a madwoman, getting photographed and posted online. Do you know how much damage you've caused the company?" His words were like knives, piercing Phoebe's hopeful heart into 1,000 pieces. She looked at Sebastian in disbelief, only managing to speak after a long pause. "Seb, did you come here just to ask me this?" Sebastian finally noticed Phoebe's deathly pale face, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Phoebe reached out, took Sebastian's hand, and looked at the wedding ring on his finger, her voice hoarse. "Seb, do you still love me?" Emotions churned in Sebastian's eyes. He squatted down, guided by Phoebe's pull to meet her gaze, then said, "Yes, what about you? Do you love me?" For some reason, Phoebe felt a strange unease in her heart. But she still said, "Of course I love you." Hearing her answer, a look of satisfaction flashed across Sebastian's face. Then, his voice unusually gentle, he said, "Then be good. This incident has caused too much trouble. I'm planning to have you stay in a mental hospital for a while." Chapter 5. No escape. Phoebe let go of his hand, the shock and grief in her eyes instantly displeasing the man. "You're not willing? This is the best solution." Phoebe opened her mouth, momentarily speechless. After a while, she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go." She didn't want to be sent to that place again by someone close to her. Sebastian's eyes turned cold. "This isn't up for discussion. I've already contacted the hospital. You'll be sent there this afternoon." Her heart felt like it was slowly suffocating. Phoebe's hands clenched the blanket tightly. She could only repeat, "I won't go, I don't want to go." Sebastian said impatiently, "The Sterling family cannot have a young mistress with a ruined reputation." He didn't want to waste any more time here. With a cold sneer, he said, "As for the Ashton family, the Southside business deal should be enough to satisfy your appetite, right?" Phoebe stared at him, stunned. The light in her eyes slowly died. After a long while, she said, "All right. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you." Sebastian paused, raised an eyebrow, and walked out of the hospital room. Mrs. Sterling admitted to the hospital public opinion was quickly suppressed. And from that day on, Phoebe never had a good night's sleep. She always wondered, would Sebastian, like her parents, abandon her here and slowly forget about her? Tears fell silently in the darkness, tracing a path to her temples and disappearing. Half a month later, Sebastian finally came. He looked at the thin woman before him and frowned. "Why have you lost so much weight? Is the food here bad?" I'll have them change the chef. He didn't mention taking her away. Phoebe forced a smile. I'm fine. How's the company? Actually, there was no need to ask. Sebastian's relaxed demeanor said it all. Phoebe just realized that, apart from these things, she had nothing else to ask her husband. Sebastian nodded. It's pretty much back on track. Phoebe looked at him and suddenly asked, I remember you took me to a beach last year. I wonder if we can go again this year. Sebastian looked down, saw the anticipation flickering in Phoebe's eyes, and his heart suddenly softened. He leaned down slightly. I'll have some free time in the second half of the year. I'll take you. Phoebe nodded, a genuine smile gracing her eyes. A little while later, Sebastian took a call and left in a hurry. Phoebe was alone again in the silence. She lay down, slowly feeling a little sleepy. But an uninvited guest arrived unexpectedly. A woman in the latest Burberry trench coat, with exquisite makeup, pushed open the door, her voice preceding her. My name is Bianca White. You should know who I am. Bianca White scrutinized the woman on the bed with a critical and jealous gaze. Sebastian was always a man of his word, yet for this woman, he had taken back what the White family had already obtained. Phoebe froze. The woman before her was clearly the famous actress, the eldest daughter of the White family, Bianca White. Bianca, so this was the Bianca, her body tensed instinctively. What are you doing here? Bianca's tone was mocking. Seb always said you were boring and annoying. Looking at you now, it's true. Phoebe felt a chill. Her fingers, hidden under the blanket, began to tremble unconsciously. She feigned calmness. Miss White, no matter what, I am the rightful Mrs. Sterling. Bianca laughed. Did you know? I'm pregnant. Phoebe's pupils contracted sharply. Do you think Seb let you in here just as a temporary measure? Let me tell you, you'll never get out of here in this lifetime. The lights in the hospital went out, but that sentence still echoed in Phoebe's mind. In the middle of the night, she got out of bed and quietly walked out of the room, but she hadn't gone far before a nurse spotted her. Miss Ashton, please return to your room. I'm not sick. I want to go out. Phoebe clutched the corner of her clothes, her body tense, but such words were common here. The nurses exchanged glances, surrounded Phoebe, and while verbally coaxing her, forcibly grabbed her. Phoebe struggled but was still dragged back to her room, unable to resist. The emotions accumulated over many days completely snapped the string of sanity in her mind. Sebastian was jolted awake by the harsh ringing of his phone. The asylum doctor's voice was panicked. President Sterling, please come over. Mrs. Sterling? She seems to have really gone mad. When Sebastian saw Phoebe tied to the hospital bed, his temples began to throb. The world in Phoebe's eyes had turned black and white, and Sebastian's appearance was the only color. She widened her eyes, her bound hands reaching out to him desperately, her voice broken and hoarse. Seb, save me, Seb. Sebastian walked over, his face dark, and forcefully held down the struggling woman on the bed. His voice was harsh. Phoebe Ashton, can you stop pretending? You've only been here a few days, and you're already putting on such a show. Her heart was a tangled mess, but Phoebe was so frightened she tried to clutch Sebastian's hand with her fingers, pleading, Seb, don't leave me here. Save me, don't abandon me. Sebastian took a deep breath, forcibly pried her hand away, stood up straight, and said to the doctor, give her medication. I don't care if she's really mad or faking it, but she's not to set foot out of this room. The asylum doctor was prepared and approached with a tranquilizer. Seeing the cold glint of the needle, Phoebe let out a piercing scream. No one would believe that she, in this state, wasn't mentally ill. In her panic, she found Sebastian's figure, only to see the man avert his eyes with disgust and turn to walk out. That door, in her bloodshot eyes, closed completely. Chapter 6. The press conference. The moment the medication was injected into her body, Phoebe's eyelids grew heavy and closed. In the last moment before losing consciousness, she thought with a heart full of bitterness. Seb, you said you would always protect me. Phoebe fell asleep, and then she dreamed of Sebastian. It was the Sebastian of his youth. 17 years old, the spirited young master of the Sterling family, experiencing life in the countryside, while 16-year-old Phoebe had just lost her grandmother, her only support. Beautiful and alone. Greedy eyes lingered on her slender figure. Finally, she was tricked into a small alley. Just as she was about to despair, almost ready to take them down with her, a clear male voice rang out, What are you doing? A beam of light pierced her dark world. The heroic young master of the Sterling family was swarmed and beaten up by the delinquents, but even so, he kept protecting the barely clothed girl. Later, Sebastian was to return to the city. The boy, his face still bruised, raised a brilliant smile and placed a protective amulet in Phoebe's hand. "Phoebe, this is for you. It will protect you just like I will." Phoebe's eyes snapped open. The hospital room was cold and silent. In the darkness, she lay with her eyes open for a long time before realizing this was reality. She turned over with difficulty, tightly clutching the small protective amulet from under her pillow. After a long while, a tear escaped from the corner of her eye. She wanted to ask Sebastian, "Why did you abandon me?" Meanwhile, in the Sterling Corporation's presidential office, Sebastian looked at Bianca White, his voice grave. "What did you say?" "Darling, I'm pregnant. If we don't get married soon, I won't be able to hide it," Bianca White said coyly. Sebastian's heart stirred, but the image that came to mind was Phoebe's. After a long pause, he finally said, "I understand. You can go back." Bianca White got into her car, a shadow crossing her eyes. Sebastian hadn't mentioned marriage at all. Could it be that woman from the Ashton family was so hard for him to let go of? Thinking this, Bianca White dialed her agent's number and said coldly, "Contact the gossip bloggers." In his office, Sebastian flipped through reports, an inexplicable unease settling in his heart. 2 days later, public opinion fermented. The headlines of major media outlets were all Sterling Corporation's CEO cheats with actress. Sebastian looked at the continuously falling stock market, his face so dark it looked like water might drip from it. His secretary, Arthur Finch, spoke up beside him. "President Sterling, the only way now is for Mrs. Sterling to make a sacrifice. As long as she comes forward to clarify that you two divorced long ago, the public opinion will dissipate." Sebastian thought of Phoebe's eyes, filled with sorrow, and his heart suddenly became terribly agitated. He waved his hand. "Let the PR department handle it first." Another 2 days passed, and Sebastian finally appeared in the hospital room. When Phoebe saw him, her eyes showed the same smile as always, gentle and serene. Sebastian sat down in front of Phoebe and said softly, "Phobes, I have something to tell you." The original text uses "Mian. So this should be "my cotton blossom." Phoebe looked at his evasive eyes and her heart slowly sank. She instinctively grasped Sebastian's hand as if to give herself some comfort. Sebastian's hand tightened, and he steeled himself to speak. "Bianca White is pregnant. I need you to tell the public that we divorced long ago." Phoebe's eyes widened, her fingertips instantly turning cold. She stared fixedly at the man before her, suddenly finding him so unfamiliar. Neither of them spoke. After a long pause, Phoebe spoke, her face pale. "You're lying to me again, aren't you?" Sebastian hated seeing her like this the most. He pulled his hand away. "I have someone else outside. You've known that for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes." Sebastian had never tried to hide it from her. It was she who had been deceiving herself. Her heart hung empty, and the hand he had held felt as if it had been stabbed viciously. A thick metallic taste rose in her throat. Phoebe scrutinized the man's features, inch by inch, suffocating. She suddenly remembered that dream. Did the boy in the dream, who said, "I will protect you," know that one day he would personally push away the girl he had protected even when severely injured? The tears in her eyes gradually dispersed, and then she said, "All right. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you." The press conference was held quickly. Phoebe sat on the stage, expressionless. Below the stage, countless flashing lights were like the eyes of wild beasts, staring at her covetously. "My husband, Sebastian Sterling." She slowly leaned towards the microphone, speaking word by word. She said, "Did indeed have an affair during our marriage." Chapter 7, pitiful creature like cold water dropped into hot oil, the scene erupted into an uproar. Flashes, microphones, all rushed towards Phoebe. Phoebe, however, only looked towards Sebastian, who was standing at the door. But from such a distance, she couldn't make out his expression at all. The knife in her heart twisted and turned, just as he wished. Pain, so much pain that she could finally breathe. The words were out. She knew very well that her future with Sebastian was utterly ruined. Sebastian's face was ashen as he waved his hand. Several nurses pushed through the crowd, restrained the motionless Phoebe, and shouted into the microphone, "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling is having an episode. She suffers from delusional disorder." With that, They tried to lead Phoebe away, but the media wouldn't let go of such a story. The two sides began to shove each other, and the scene descended into chaos. Phoebe was pushed back and forth. She covered her head, but somehow a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. "Stop, she's bleeding," someone in the crowd shouted. Sebastian's expression changed. He pushed through the people and saw Phoebe collapsed on the ground, her trouser leg stained red with blood. Outside the emergency room, Sebastian listened to the doctor's words, his face grim. Phoebe was pregnant. Phoebe woke up the next day. The familiar hospital room was empty. From outside the door came Sebastian's cold, clear voice. "Prepare for surgery. I will not have the child of a psycho." Phoebe's heart leaped violently. She looked at her stomach. The flat abdomen no longer throbbed with pain, yet she felt as if she could sense another tiny heartbeat. Weakly, she turned and got out of bed, stumbling as she pulled open the door. Sebastian turned his head, and their eyes met. Phoebe licked her dry lips and said hoarsely, "Sebastian Sterling, I'm not sick." But the way Sebastian looked at her sent a chill down her spine. She heard him sneer, "Phoebe Ashton, still trying to fool me. Weren't you released from a mental hospital 10 years ago?" In an instant, Phoebe's mind went blank. That past she most wanted him to never know about had been discovered. Her whole body began to tremble uncontrollably. Sebastian, however, turned his eyes away, unwilling to look at her any longer. He waved his hand dismissively at a nurse and ordered, "Since she's awake, prepare for surgery immediately." Phoebe snapped back to her senses. Before she could take 2 steps to run, she was grabbed and pushed towards the operating room. Phoebe struggled, looking at Sebastian, tears finally streaming down her face. She reached out, trying to grasp her only hope, but only broken pleas escaped her throat. "I was framed. I'm not sick. I'm really not. Seb, save me, Seb. Save me." Sebastian finally glanced at her, but his face was full of impatience. He waved his hand at the nurse. A tranquilizer was injected into Phoebe's body. The operating room door slowly closed. She kept her eyes open, looking in the man's direction, watching his figure completely disappear. The world plunged into darkness. Phoebe thought she saw her grandmother's face, faintly appearing and then vanishing. Then it was Sebastian, the 17-year-old Sebastian. He had his back to her, walking away without a backward glance. Too desperate, too sad. "Sebastian, why is the despair in my life delivered by your own hand?" When she woke again, the room was dark and silent, with only a faint light seeping through the crack in the door. The hushed gossip of the young nurses on duty outside the door was infinitely amplified in the silence. That Mrs. Sterling in 306 is so pitiful. Her baby was forcibly taken away. I always feel like she's not mad. "Don't talk nonsense." Her husband, President Sterling, said she's sick. "So she's sick." Phoebe weakly reached out, her palms slowly resting on her lower abdomen, but she could only feel an emptiness. Her child was gone. A bone-chilling cold seeped from her palm, pervading her entire body. Phoebe should have cried, but even her tears had dried up. She found it hard to breathe. She turned to look out the window. It was pitch black, no stars, no moonlight. She got up, haphazardly pulling out the IV needle from the back of her hand. Blood oozed out, but she felt nothing. She pushed open the window. The cold wind from outside pierced through her chest. She stood there for a while. Then, she stepped onto the windowsill and without hesitation, jumped. Chapter 8. Paying the price outside the emergency room. A chill ran down Sebastian's back. He had seen the hospital surveillance footage. Phoebe had jumped herself. Sebastian looked at the illuminated red light of the emergency room, and the fire in his heart began to flare up. A child who might inherit a mental illness, he didn't want it, and she had to retaliate in this way. Even without the child, he hadn't thought of divorce. But Phoebe, she never knew how to do anything but cause trouble. The emergency room light went out. The doctor came out and said, "Mr. Sterling, your wife is out of danger." Sebastian nodded and turned to leave. It wasn't until the next morning that Phoebe woke up. Every part of her body ached. She struggled to open her eyes and saw the man with stubble on his chin standing by her bed. She blinked, her gaze cold as she asked, "Who are you?" Sebastian's face instantly turned ugly. He said sarcastically, "First, you retaliate with death and now you're playing amnesia? Phoebe Ashton, where did you learn so many tricks?" Phoebe listened, but there was no emotion in her dark eyes. No love, not even resentment. Sebastian's heart twitched. He inexplicably felt as if he had lost something. He composed himself and said harshly, "The child is gone, so be it. Isn't it enough that a psycho like you disgraces the Sterling family? Did you want to bring a little one along to share the shame?" Seeing Phoebe still indifferent, he gritted his teeth and left in anger. Not long after Sebastian left, Phoebe's parents arrived with her brother. Looking at Phoebe lying in the hospital bed, Phoebe Ashton cursed, "You jinx after marrying President Sterling, you haven't helped the family one bit, and now you've made him angry with us." Arthur Ashton interrupted her, his voice gentle, "Phobes, just apologize to President Sterling, and this will blow over. You can always have another child later." Phoebe, however, only heard his regret at losing a bargaining chip. Marcus Ashton, at the side, also spoke up, "Sis, just coax Seb a bit. I'm counting on him to get me a new car next month." Phoebe listened intently, every word making her want to laugh. She looked up, scanning the three of them, and truly did laugh. "Why don't you ask if I'm okay?" The Ashtons' expressions changed as they heard Phoebe say, "I'm not being obedient. What can you threaten me with now? Lock me up in a mental hospital again?" The Ashtons looked at this rebellious Phoebe in astonishment. Phoebe Ashton immediately started wailing and cursing. Phoebe, however, remained completely indifferent. In the end, the Ashtons could only leave dejectedly. When Sebastian received this news, he said nothing, only instructing his men to keep a close watch on Phoebe. This day, Bianca White came again. She smiled smugly. "Phoebe Ashton, I heard you jumped off a building. Why did you think of such a stupid method?" Phoebe looked at her coldly. "Bianca White, you're the esteemed daughter of the White family, yet you choose to be a mistress. It seems you quite enjoy this kind of sneaky business." What Bianca White hated most was this identity that Phoebe occupied. Her face twisted for a moment. She placed a hand on her lower abdomen and said with a smile, "I may be the mistress, but my child is perfectly fine." "Your child, however, was only fit to become a pool of blood." Phoebe bit her lip hard, glaring at her. Bianca White glanced around, leaned closer to Phoebe, and whispered with a laugh, "I forgot to tell you something. I was the one who bribed the doctor to tell Seb your mental illness is hereditary." Phoebe looked at her sharply, the pain and hatred in her heart instantly surging. If it weren't for her child wouldn't have died. Bianca White, Phoebe, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, grabbed Bianca White, only one thought in her mind. She wanted this woman to pay for her child's life. "What are you doing? Let go of me!" Bianca White, her hair pulled, cried out in pain. Phoebe paid no heed, but she was still recovering and was no match for a healthy person. Bianca White shoved her away, then tripped over the leg of the bed, stumbled, and fell, hitting her head hard on the footboard. The next moment, Phoebe heard Sebastian's shocked and angry voice. "What are you doing?" Sebastian rushed to help Bianca White up from the floor, only to see blood trickling down her forehead. Bianca White clutched his sleeve, disheveled, and cried, "Darling, my stomach. It hurts so much." Phoebe stumbled, grabbing the hospital bed to pull herself up, her eyes glistening. She blinked, trying to suppress the weak tears. She told herself, "That man doesn't love you anymore. He's not your Seb anymore, Phoebe Ashton. Don't you understand yet?" But even after telling herself 1,000 times, seeing Sebastian tenderly holding Bianca White still made her feel breathless. "Phoebe Ashton, you madwoman," Sebastian roared at her with disgust. Phoebe pressed her hand to her heart, her face a mixture of tears and laughter. "Sebastian Sterling, I was always a psycho everyone despised." The anger Sebastian had suppressed these past few days finally reached its peak. He turned to Arthur Finch, his secretary, who was standing by the door, and said, "Call the police. I want her to pay the price." Chapter 9. "My child is gone 2 intentional injury, sentenced to 3 years in prison." Phoebe listened to the verdict, her expression numb. When pain reaches a certain point, one becomes numb, and she had long been numb. It was just Sebastian, for Bianca White's sake, wanting to abandon her completely. In the family gallery, no one came to see her. Not the Ashtons, not Sebastian. Life in prison was consistently cold and tedious, but Phoebe's arrival brought amusement to some. "Newbie, take your toothbrush and clean the toilet," said a woman with a scar on her face, Brenda Scar Rogers. Phoebe paused, and the next moment, a slap landed on her face. The woman, Scar, looked at her mockingly. "What, not willing?" Almost instantly, half of Phoebe's face went numb. A desperate panic rose in Phoebe's heart. This scene seemed to overlap with the past. The same bullying, the same lack of anyone to rely on. Seeing Phoebe unresponsive, Scar gestured to the others around her, and a group of them closed in. Day after day, there wasn't a single unbruised spot on Phoebe's body, but on the surface, nothing much showed. 2 weeks later, Sebastian finally came. He looked at Phoebe coldly and said, "Bianca's child is gone. Are you satisfied with this result?" The cold glass seemed to completely sever their past. Phoebe looked at him, paused for a long time, then slowly spoke. "Sebastian Sterling, a month ago, my child was gone too." Phoebe had only spoken the truth, but anger instantly flared on Sebastian's face. "It seems you're unrepentant. Phoebe Ashton, let's get a divorce. I'll have someone bring you the papers to sign." Phoebe's hands, resting on her lap, suddenly clenched. She stared fixedly at the man before her, and her heart, numb with pain, actually began to feel again. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She finally couldn't hold them back, so he could be even crueler. Phoebe forced the words from her throat, asking syllable by syllable, "You said you would always protect me." Sebastian froze, assuming she was referring to their wedding vows, which only made him more irritated. He stood up, his eyes filled with ruthless determination. "At that time, I didn't know you were such a deranged psycho." Sebastian's figure disappeared from the visiting room. Phoebe, as if she had lost her soul, allowed the prison guard to lead her back to her cell. Her mind was filled with Sebastian's final expression, hateful and disgusted, without a trace of lingering affection. At this moment, she desperately wanted to cry out, even if it was a useless wail. But she couldn't. Even the last shred of her dignity was choked in her throat. Only despair remained. Phoebe lay quietly on the bed, struggling to lift her hand to cover her eyes. Before long, footsteps sounded in the room, then stopped beside her. Phoebe opened her eyes. Scar unceremoniously dragged her off the bed, and without a word, began to rummage through her belongings and her bed. Phoebe was a little confused, until she saw her protective amulet. "What are you doing?" "That's mine." Before Scar could reach for it, Phoebe, who had never resisted before, lunged forward and snatched the amulet. Scar showed a flicker of surprise, then a cruel smile spread across her face. The next moment, Scar yanked her over, and Phoebe's head slammed hard against the metal bed frame. Pain, accompanied by dizziness, made Phoebe momentarily dazed. Then her hand was empty. The protective amulet she treasured so much was in someone else's hands. Chapter 10, it was her. "Give it back to me." Phoebe could barely stand, yet her gaze remained fixed on the protective amulet. "You want it. Here you go." Scar tore the amulet to shreds and scattered the pieces over Phoebe. Phoebe stared blankly for a moment, then looked at the woman, her eyes filled with a dead, frenzied look. No one had expected that the frail, bullied woman would erupt with such strength. Phoebe tackled Scar onto the bed, her hands gripping Scar's neck tightly, gritting her teeth, refusing to let go no matter who pulled at her. "You destroyed it. How could you destroy it?" Over and over, Phoebe repeated only this sentence. This was the only thing her Seb had left her. In the struggle, someone spoke up. "Didn't they say as long as she divorces him, it's fine? Didn't President Sterling say that if one party dies, that's also acceptable?" Time seemed to freeze at that moment. Phoebe turned to look at the group of people, her expression completely vacant. Phoebe's grip loosened, and she was thrown to the ground. Scar took several deep breaths and then stomped on Phoebe's body mercilessly a few times. Phoebe's body trembled a few times, but she seemed oblivious. She murmured softly, "Sebastian Sterling, are you that impatient?" The bullying these past few days, tonight's incident, so it was all Sebastian's doing. He wanted her to regret. He wanted her to admit her mistakes. He wanted her to regret ever meeting him in this life. Phoebe slowly stood up and said only one sentence, "Tell him as he wishes." Then she turned, and with an indescribable aura, charged violently towards the heavy iron door. A dull thud echoed in the room. Phoebe's body slumped softly to the ground. In the darkness, a bloody flower bloomed on the smooth iron door. At the same time, Sebastian, lying in bed, woke with a start. He listened to the pitter-patter of rain after the thunder, his brow remaining furrowed. He had dreamed of Phoebe. In the dream, her smile was bright and gentle, her eyes full of admiration for him. She was like a different person from the Phoebe he had seen a few days ago, with her cold, desolate eyes. Sebastian leaned against the headboard, looking at the empty side of the bed. In a daze, he seemed to see Phoebe's figure. When he felt annoyed with Phoebe, he would always come home late at night. But every time he pushed open the door, he would see Phoebe waiting for him with the nightlight on. Sebastian rubbed his temples hard and dialed Arthur Finch's number. Pull some strings. Get Phoebe Ashton out in a few months. Finch was stunned. He asked President Sterling, what about the divorce papers? Sebastian paused, then said, forget it. He thought he might as well forgive that woman this once. Once she'd learned her lesson, she'd know how to behave. The next day, the continuous drizzle didn't stop. As soon as Sebastian woke up, he received a call from Finch. President Sterling, please come to the prison. Sebastian replied impatiently, what if she's not willing to come back? Let her stay there. Finch's voice was heavy. Miss Ashton, something happened to her. Sebastian practically floored the accelerator on his way to the prison. The cold air of the prison rushed to meet him. Sebastian walked in, step by step, the surroundings so quiet it seemed he could only hear his own footsteps. A guard led him to a cold room. Inside, there were only rows and rows of large cabinets. A sharp pain suddenly shot through Sebastian's temple. He pressed his lips together tightly and looked at the guard. Where is she? Why bring me to the infirmary? To watch her put on another act? The guard glanced at him calmly. She used a key to open a cabinet. With a whoosh, she pulled it straight out. Icy air billowed out. Inside the cabinet lay Phoebe Ashton. Chapter 11. Fury. People like Sebastian Sterling became calmer the more shocked and enraged they were. He turned to his secretary, Arthur Finch, his voice very soft, as if afraid of disturbing someone. What happened? The guard said Miss Ashton was involved in a brawl. She couldn't hold on until the ambulance arrived. Sebastian turned back, stared intently at Phoebe Ashton before him, and repeated, a brawl, couldn't hold on. Finch felt the heavy pressure emanating from the man and dared not speak. Sebastian stood silently for a long time before saying, go and bring out everyone who lived with her. He walked over to Phoebe, unhesitatingly placing his hand on her face. He said softly, I can't let you go home like this, unclear. I will get justice for you. Finch, standing to the side, saw Sebastian's eyes suddenly turn red after he said this. Sebastian withdrew his hand, the icy touch intensifying his fury. He took a deep breath and abruptly turned and left the room. At the prison, the person in charge, Officer Colin Chambers, was also at his wits' end. Sebastian Sterling's name in the city was synonymous with power and influence. The corporation under him brought in immeasurable economic benefits. Chambers, at a loss, slammed his teacup on the ground and roared at his subordinate, Warden Thomas Fisher. Mrs. Sterling was bullied in prison, and you didn't say anything now. With this situation, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? Fisher lowered his head, his lips moving, but he couldn't utter a word for a long time. He felt innocent too. Who would have known that the esteemed Mrs. Sterling would end up in prison? Even less did anyone expect that he, by merely pocketing some money and concealing what he thought was a trivial matter, would cause such consequences. But facing his superior's murderous gaze, he dared not remain silent. He mentally rehearsed his words several times before cautiously saying, actually, this matter can't be entirely blamed on us. Perhaps we could push out those who lived with Mrs. Sterling. Before he could finish, another folder was thrown at him. Chambers frowned, his voice cold. Do you think Mr. Sterling's anger can be appeased so easily? That was a human life. His living wife is gone just like that. Do you think he won't pursue this to the end? Chambers cursed fiercely, but he also knew in his heart that he couldn't escape blame for this incident. But the current situation left him no room for maneuver. The more powerless he felt, the angrier he became. You'd better explain clearly what exactly happened, or else, if I have a hard time, you'll have an even harder one. Chambers was very clear about certain practices. Conflicts between prisoners were common, but it was unheard of for someone to die right under their noses. Phoebe Ashton's death could absolutely not be summarized by that flimsy sentence in the report. Just as Fisher was still hesitating, the phone on Chambers' desk rang. A businesslike voice came from the other end. Officer Chambers, bring your men and come over. Hearing this voice, cold sweat instantly beaded on Chambers' forehead. He acknowledged, hung up the phone, looked at Fisher, his eyes filled with despair. Come with me. Some things are better reported when we get there. Sebastian sat in an office, asking the person who came to pour tea, how much longer? His tone was condescending, slightly out of place in this setting. But the clerk knew this man's status and said nervously, "At most half an hour, President Sterling." "Please wait a moment." No one knew why Mrs. Sterling was in prison, much less why, in just a week, Phoebe Ashton had died so inexplicably everyone was frantic about this matter. But the clerk observed that Sebastian Sterling, the victim's family member, seemed rather calm. For a moment, he was unsure. Sebastian looked at the tea leaves floating in the cup, a slight smile playing on his lips, but he said nothing. Yet his gaze was like that of a predatory beast, terrifying to the extreme. Chapter 12. Regret on the way, Officer Colin Chambers instructed his subordinate, Warden Thomas Fisher, "When we get inside, don't say anything rash. Whatever you've done, tell them everything, and we might still be able to protect you. If you're unwilling, never mind dragging others down. Mr. Sterling is not someone to be trifled with." The contributions Sebastian Sterling had made to the city were considerable, certainly not something these minor figures could compare to. Regardless, the higher-ups would absolutely not want to lose this god of wealth. And this Mr. Sterling's capabilities and methods, evident from his becoming a magnate at such a young age, were not to be trifled with. The two drove to the location. Chambers took a deep breath and said, "I'll go in first, you think it over." Fisher stood there with his head down, looking as if he were too scared to speak. As soon as Chambers left, Fisher turned and dialed a number. "Miss White, it's me, Thomas Fisher. You clearly said Mr. Sterling wouldn't react at all to Phoebe Ashton's death. What now? If you don't find a solution for me, don't blame me for exposing you." Hearing this, Bianca White's face flashed with annoyance, her fingers drumming restlessly on the table. She said irritably, "How would I know? Clearly." Clearly, Sebastian Sterling had seemed indifferent to Phoebe Ashton. Who knew that once the woman died, this man would change so completely? Thinking of this, Bianca White became even more agitated. She said in a low voice, "I'll find a way to get you out of this, but you keep your mouth shut in front of Sebastian Sterling. Otherwise, if he has ways to make your life miserable, so do I," Thomas Fisher agreed repeatedly. But Bianca White didn't see that on his end of the line. A look of regret had already appeared in his eyes. Money was good, but one had to have the ability to take it. Fisher once thought he had the ability, but now it seemed he was nothing, and had only gotten himself into a mess. He just hoped this Mr. Sterling was only putting on a show. Wealthy families, right. Even if a relative had an accident, it was still a loss of face, let alone a nominal wife. Thinking this, Fisher felt a little more at ease. That's right, if Mr. Sterling really cared so much about this wife, why would he let her step into a dirty place like a prison? Officer Chambers entered the office. As soon as he walked in, he first saw his superior's gloomy face. Glancing aside, he then saw Sebastian Sterling's expressionless face, feeling a little intimidated, but he still braced himself and stepped forward. The superior officer spoke, "This is Mr. Sterling, the husband of Miss Ashton from this incident. Now, tell us what happened." Sebastian looked at Chambers, the coldness in his eyes impossible to ignore. He said faintly, "I just want to know the real cause of Phoebe Ashton's death." Sebastian always preferred a direct way of doing things. Phoebe Ashton was dead. He didn't believe those deceptive explanations, so he came to ask himself. This was the best way. Of course, the other party could choose not to tell the truth, but they had to consider the consequences of not telling the truth. Until now, Sebastian had not profoundly realized what Phoebe Ashton's death truly meant to him. Death, to everyone who hasn't experienced it, is a very distant thing. Few people realize at the beginning that this person is gone and can no longer appear in their sight or life. Sebastian had always had smooth sailing. At this moment, he only felt that Phoebe Ashton was gone, and he should seek justice for her. But in the days to come, he would deeply understand the meaning of someone no longer being by his side. Chambers had already prepared his statement in his mind. He now said, "Mr. Sterling, I am undeniably responsible for Mrs. Sterling's death. But as for what exactly happened, I think it's better to let someone closer to Mrs. Sterling explain. What do you think?" Since the disciplinary action was unavoidable this time, Chambers was really unwilling to say more and could only push Thomas Fisher forward. Sebastian glanced at him but didn't say much. He nodded his chin. "Fine," then he shifted his gaze to the other person. So Chambers heard his superior say, Colin Chambers, your disciplinary action will be out next week. You can go. A human life is a major issue anywhere, and for the rich and powerful, it's not so easy to escape. Even if Colin Chambers had done nothing, it didn't prevent his disciplinary action from being a voluntary resignation. Chambers turned to leave, his face ashen, and heard Sebastian answer a call. Is that so? I'll be right over. Colin Chambers felt a little strange. Although he couldn't hear what was said on the other end of the phone, Sebastian's tone was full of profound meaning. It was inscrutable. Sebastian stood up, dressed in a suit, his tone also very calm. I'll head back first. I'll visit again another day. This matter wasn't over, but both the superior and Chambers breathed a sigh of relief. At least, there was still time for them to think of countermeasures, so they wouldn't be like today, flustered and treated like fish on a chopping block. Sebastian's car was parked downstairs. After getting in, he subconsciously rubbed his fingers and said softly, "The White family, a bit too hasty." Chapter 13, The Visit the Sterling Residence. George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling sat on the sofa, opposite a couple of similar age and a beautiful young woman. George Sterling Sr. twirled his teacup but ultimately didn't pick it up. He thought about the news he had just received, finding it somewhat incomprehensible. What did they mean? The White family's daughter was pregnant with his son's child, and they were here to discuss wedding dates? George Sterling Sr. had cultivated his health for many years, but upon hearing this news from the White family, he almost lost his composure. In his entire life, he only had one son, Sebastian Sterling. But this child had brought him unexpected surprises, exceptional intelligence, a keen business acumen. Since taking over the company at 25, in just 3 years, the company's profits had more than doubled. For a conglomerate like Sterling Corporation, any further progress was a miracle, yet Sebastian had turned this miracle into a legend. George Sterling Sr. thus stopped meddling in company affairs, giving Sebastian full reign. He himself retreated behind the scenes, living the leisurely life he had long desired. When Sebastian wanted to marry that daughter of the Ashton family, George Sterling Sr. had initially been unwilling. It wasn't about social standing. His son didn't need a marriage alliance to gain anything. It was just that the Ashton girl had been sent to the countryside. There was a gap of several years that he couldn't account for, which wasn't secure enough. He was also afraid that if Sebastian got emotionally involved, there might be unforeseen complications. However, in the end, Sebastian insisted, and George Sr. and Margaret Sterling said nothing more. After the marriage, the young couple got along reasonably well. Margaret Sterling was particularly fond of Phoebe Ashton, so George Sterling Sr. also felt at ease, but it had only been 3 years of marriage. How did things turn out like this? George Sterling Sr. couldn't figure it out and could only call Sebastian back for a face-to-face confrontation. The White family and the Ashton family were of roughly similar status, but George Sterling Sr. didn't quite like Bianca White's appearance. Although she was beautiful, he could see the calculation and shrewdness in her eyes at a glance. At this moment, George Sterling Sr. thought of Phoebe Ashton. That child always showed them respect in her words and actions. Her features were serene, and she spoke gently, a very suitable match for Sebastian. Just as George Sterling Sr. was idly pondering, there was a sound at the door. Sebastian had returned. "Dad, Mom?" Sebastian sat down, greeted them, and then fell silent. Bianca White's eyes lit up with joy when she saw him. But she also knew this wasn't the time for her to speak, so she waited patiently, feigning a shy and timid demeanor. Mr. White glanced at his wife and daughter, then spoke. "Mr. Sterling, according to my daughter, she is already carrying your child. What do you think should be done about this?" Mr. White had originally intended to address Sebastian formally, but on second thought, his daughter was already pregnant. He might be his son-in-law in the future, so he changed the address. In his view, Bianca White was excellent in every way, at least no less than the daughter of that declining Ashton family. Sebastian must have known this, which was why he allowed his daughter to get pregnant. Although it was somewhat improper for the woman's side to initiate talk of marriage, considering the Sterling family's power, Mr. White felt relieved. All that remained was his eagerness for this marriage. Although Sterling Corporation had some trouble a while ago, it had long since subsided. Sterling Corporation was still that behemoth they could only look up to, not even daring to think of catching up. George Sterling Sr. coughed lightly and nudged his wife beside him, signaling her to say something. Margaret Sterling understood. After a pause, she said, "Seb, your father and I were unaware of this matter. We weren't prepared for Miss White and her parents to visit. What are your thoughts now?" In front of the White family, Margaret Sterling couldn't very well speak of Phoebe Ashton. But in her heart, she believed Sebastian wasn't so muddle-headed. No one would have an affair so blatantly, especially not with Phoebe Ashton, whom Sebastian had insisted on marrying 3 years ago. Margaret Sterling didn't believe it. Upon hearing this, Sebastian gently raised his eyes and looked at the expectant Bianca White. His tone was cold. Miss White volunteered to be the other woman. "What, now you think a child can control me? How naive." Chapter 14. Take away. As soon as the words fell, the atmosphere in the living room froze for a moment. Except for Sebastian, everyone's expression was quite a spectacle. Surprise, shock, confusion, embarrassment, anger. Sebastian watched, suddenly finding it amusing, yet also very dull. He suddenly thought of Phoebe Ashton, then remembered seeing her this afternoon, lying there lifelessly. "No, she shouldn't be sleeping in a strange place," Sebastian suddenly said. Margaret Sterling beside him didn't understand and asked with concern, "Seb, what are you talking about?" But Sebastian just stood up to leave, not answering her. This situation made the White family extremely embarrassed. Bianca White's mother raised her voice, "President Sterling, where are you going? My White family may not be a great noble clan, but Bianca was also raised by me with great care. Your current behavior is truly insulting. Is the Sterling family just going to ignore my innocent daughter like this?" Mr. White said nothing. Mrs. White's words were what he wanted to say. George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling didn't know how to answer. Sebastian's current age and achievements meant they couldn't make decisions for him, and their trust in their son, built over so many years, was gradually dissipating under the blow of reality. For a moment, neither of them knew what expression to wear. However, George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling were both well-mannered people. Margaret Sterling spoke first. "Seb, if what Miss White says is true, then you must handle it properly. You made a mistake, how can you just walk away?" Sebastian seemed not to hear. All he wanted now was to take Phoebe Ashton home. He turned, his face full of ferocity. "Bianca White, take your parents and go home. I don't want this to happen again. Otherwise, I don't mind making the White family disappear from Seacliff City." A chill ran through Bianca White. She was used to seeing Sebastian's coldness towards Phoebe Ashton. At that time, she felt delight and satisfaction, but she never thought that one day, this coldness would be directed at her. She had heard what Sebastian said. With a little thought, she knew who he was talking about. Bianca White clutched her mother's hand and stood up. Looking at Sebastian's back as he was about to reach the door, she suddenly shouted, "Seb, I know my actions today have made you dissatisfied with me, but Phoebe Ashton is clearly dead. Why do you still refuse me?" Sebastian stopped. Bianca White's heart leaped into her throat. She, too, was making a desperate gamble. She came today, of course, to become Mrs. Sterling legitimately. She didn't believe that, faced with a grandchild and a deceased former daughter-in-law, the Sterling parents would still choose the latter. Sure enough, George Sterling Sr. abruptly stood up and questioned, "Miss White, what did you say?" Sebastian didn't turn around, nor did he speak. Having been with him for over a year, Bianca White knew that what she had just said had crossed the line. Now, facing George Sterling Sr.'s question, she chose to remain silent. Sebastian stood with his back to them. No one could see his expression. They could only hear him say, "Bianca White, I will deal with your matter, but not now." He paused, then said fiercely, "Get out of my house." The man controlled the livelihoods of thousands and had long mastered the art of not showing his emotions. But now, his abnormal anger was even more terrifying. Bianca White felt as if her neck was being squeezed, unable to utter another word. Only after Sebastian walked out the door did she gasp for breath. George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling had been bombarded with one piece of news after another today. The living room was silent for a long time. George Sterling Sr. said, "Miss White, Mr. White, it seems there will be no resolution today. But please rest assured, we will not shirk our responsibilities. How about this? We will find out the situation from our son, and then we will definitely give you a satisfactory answer. How does that sound?" Margaret Sterling also said. "Miss White, since you say you are pregnant, then take good care of yourself during your pregnancy. There's no need to say more about other things. This child belongs to the Sterling family. We will naturally acknowledge it. I will arrange for you to stay in the manor in the suburbs, okay?" Although the White family was at a disadvantage, George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling didn't feel they could bully them. The girl had sacrificed the most. For now, the only plan was to stabilize this side first, then find their son to clarify the truth of the matter. The White family found this method acceptable and said no more. That night, Bianca White moved into the manor arranged by Margaret Sterling. And here, what Sebastian wanted to do encountered another obstacle. His face was cold as he asked Arthur Finch, "What did you say?" "Miss Ashton's body was taken away by someone." Chapter 15. Childish, find her for me at any cost, find her. Sebastian didn't even step into the room where the body was kept. After saying this, he turned and got into the car. Arthur Finch sat in the passenger seat and asked, "President Sterling, I'll arrange for people to do it immediately. Where are you heading now?" "Home." Sebastian sat in the back seat, his eyes closed. For the first time, a panicky sense of loss filled his heart. He felt that things were starting to slip out of his control. "Who took her?" Sebastian asked, steadying himself. "It's said to be a man. That man has proof of kinship with Miss Ashton. I want results within a day." After Sebastian said this, he pressed the button for the partition, cutting off all lines of sight. Finch turned to look ahead, feeling helpless, but he could only comply. Sebastian closed his eyes, but his mind was filled with the fact that Phoebe Ashton was gone. He felt it was unreal. Just a few days ago, she was a living person. How could there suddenly be news of her death, and even her body couldn't be found? Death. Sebastian thought of this word, and his heart suddenly ached dully, as if a needle had pricked the tip of his heart and then withdrawn, leaving only that lingering pain that began to make him feel unwell. The car soon came to a steady stop. Sebastian sensed it, opened his eyes, pulled open the car door, and walked into his home. He closed the door and looked at the silent room, feeling only blank and lost. In the past, whenever he came home, there would always be a light on, always someone waiting. But now it was quiet all around, empty. Sebastian leaned against the door, feeling that this home, which he had personally furnished, had become unfamiliar. After standing quietly at the door for about 10 minutes, Sebastian finally raised his hand and turned on the light. Warm yellow light poured down, illuminating this spacious apartment that countless people dreamed of. But he looked and looked, then hesitantly walked towards the sofa and sat down. A sense of discomfort filled his entire chest. Sebastian raised his hand and pressed his heart. It still hurt a little. But why, he himself couldn't say. "Phoebe Ashton," Sebastian murmured softly. The moment this name left his lips, it was as if a switch had been flicked. The tall man rose from the sofa and moved quickly through each room, not missing a single spot. Such an eager search, such a helpless expression. No one could have imagined that the great Sebastian Sterling would have such a day. 2 hours later, Sebastian returned to the living room and slumped onto the cold floor. He didn't know what he was looking for. Phoebe Ashton clearly wouldn't be here. But childishly, almost neurotically, he wanted to see the woman smiling at him in some corner. Sebastian was completely unaware that something was wrong with him. On one hand, he clearly knew that Phoebe Ashton was dead, her body taken away. On the other hand, he was entirely unconscious of Phoebe Ashton's departure. Two different thoughts shuttled back and forth in his mind. What Sebastian ultimately got was emptiness, confusion, helplessness. It was an unbearable discomfort that couldn't be alleviated no matter how many times he pressed his temples while sitting on the floor. It was as if Phoebe Ashton's presence was everywhere around him, but when he opened his eyes to look, when he reached out to touch, there was only emptiness. Sebastian simply lay down on the floor, staring at the ceiling, letting his body and mind do whatever they pleased. Before Sebastian succumbed to sleepiness, his eyes seemed to moisten. "You hid yourself, you don't want me anymore. Phoebe Ashton, how could you?" Chapter 16. Sulking when Sebastian Sterling appeared at the company the next day, Arthur Finch stood outside the door for 3 minutes before knocking. "Come in." The man's low voice came from inside the office. Finch paused for a step, then pushed open the door. He walked to the desk and said, "President Sterling, we are urgently searching for news of Miss Ashton." This morning, Mr. Sterling SR called asking you to come home for dinner. Sebastian frowned slightly, then quickly relaxed it. Understood. Notify me immediately if there's any news. Finch breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, feeling that Sebastian was surprisingly easy to talk to today, but he still asked, "Then, about Mr. Sterling SR? I'll arrange it myself. If there are any more calls from them, transfer them directly to me," Sebastian said. He knew why his parents were calling the company. He had already ignored several calls from home. It seemed the matter with Bianca White still needed to be resolved. By noon, Sebastian had arranged his affairs and drove back to the old family home. George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling had waited anxiously all day, finally seeing him return. They exchanged a glance and spoke almost in unison. "What exactly happened? Tell us the truth." Sebastian lowered his eyes and said calmly, "I wronged Phoebe Ashton. This matter is my fault alone. If Mom and Dad want to keep Bianca White's child, I will make arrangements. If not, I will also handle the aftermath." Sebastian Sterling, George Sterling SR, rarely got angry. He looked at his tall son before him, his eyes full of disappointment. "Do you know what you're saying? It's not about whether we want that child or not. It's about you. Do you even understand what you're doing? Back then, you insisted on marrying Phoebe Ashton, and your mother and I didn't stop you. Once you're married, you should have the awareness of being married. Now, your marriage with Phoebe Ashton still exists, yet you've gotten another woman pregnant. Sebastian Sterling, is this how your mother and I taught you to conduct yourself? And you just casually say you'll handle it. How are you going to handle it? Phoebe Ashton, Bianca White, you can't handle either of them properly." George Sterling SR spoke for so long that he sat on the sofa, panting heavily. Margaret Sterling quickly went over to pat his back, soothing him gently. Looking at his parents, a flicker of light flashed in Sebastian's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. After George Sterling SR calmed down, Margaret Sterling turned her head and asked, "So you admit that the child in Miss White's belly is yours?" Sebastian lowered his eyes and nodded lightly. Margaret Sterling paused, then asked again, "Then yesterday, what Miss White said about Phobes? What was that about?" Table indicates Sebastian called her "my cotton blossom" early in marriage. Margaret Sterling might call her Phoebe or Phobes. I'll use Phobes as it shows some affection which Margaret had for her. At this, a fierce aura flashed around Sebastian. He said in a low voice, "She was talking nonsense. Phoebe Ashton is just sulking with me. She left. I'll find her and bring her back." Margaret Sterling was noncommittal. It was unclear whether she believed him or not. But right now, the most important thing was the child in Bianca White's belly. "You'd better think carefully. I will not acknowledge this child. If you want it, raise it far away, don't let me see it." Margaret Sterling was uncharacteristically firm this time, but George Sterling SR, sitting beside her, said nothing in opposition. As for Sebastian, after understanding his parents' intentions, he didn't particularly care. He had never thought about having children when he was with Bianca White. This child could only have been obtained through Bianca White's schemes. Thinking of this, Sebastian felt even more disgusted with Bianca White, and the coldness in his eyes gradually firmed. But you have to compensate the White family adequately. After all, their daughter followed you without a proper status and got pregnant. You need to keep this matter quiet and not let any media find out, George Sterling SR added. Sebastian had no objections and took all of his parents' words to heart. After lunch, Sebastian returned to the company. What he didn't know was that George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling had already sent people to investigate Phoebe Ashton's affairs over the past few years. Chapter 17. Confirmation. In the evening, Sebastian Sterling got off work on time. Arthur Finch asked, "President Sterling, do you have any plans for tonight?" Sebastian glanced at him and said faintly, "Going home." "Is there still no result on the matter?" Finch felt a little guilty and braced himself to say, "Over there should be news about Miss Ashton tonight." Sebastian said nothing and walked past him, leaving. The moment the elevator doors closed, Finch finally realized what mistake he had just made. What Sebastian Sterling disliked most were words like should and maybe. And he, despite having worked by President Sterling's side for so long, had made this mistake for the first time. But what puzzled him was that Sebastian hadn't said anything more, which was out of character. After much thought, Finch still couldn't figure out why. It wasn't until he had almost finished his work that a call flashing on his phone made him sit up. Is there news? Good, I'll go inform President Sterling. Sebastian had just finished washing up when he received Finch's call. He swiped to answer and heard Finch say, President Sterling, after confirmation, Miss Ashton was taken away by Liam Linden. Then have someone find her and bring her back to me. No matter the time, no matter the cost, Sebastian said coldly. A troubled expression appeared on Finch's face. Sebastian looked at him coldly and asked, If you have something to say it. Finch opened his tablet and placed it in front of Sebastian. He said, This Liam Linden is not as simple as we thought. He's an excellent businessman. In 7 years, he established himself abroad. If we use forceful means, it might not be that easy. Hearing this, Sebastian looked, and the coldness on his face deepened. Finally, he pushed the tablet away and said, No matter how difficult it is, I just want Phoebe Ashton back. With these words, Sebastian's meaning was clear. No matter what, he would not give up on Phoebe Ashton. Finch nodded and then went out. Sitting in the cubicle outside the president's office, Finch let out a long sigh. Looking at the message on his phone, his brow furrowed again. Why is Mr. Sterling SR investigating Miss Ashton, and why is he asking me about it? Finch glanced at Sebastian's office but ultimately ignored the message. Meanwhile, Bianca White was still living in the Sterling family's manor. In a place like Seacliff City, where land was as precious as gold, owning a manor was an incredible thing for ordinary people. But the Sterling family, as it happened, owned one, and not just this one. Bianca White looked at the servants coming and going, feeling very satisfied. This was the life she was supposed to live, not being ridiculed by some people for having been with President Sterling for over 2 years, and still being just a mistress who couldn't be seen in public. Bianca White had clear goals since she was young. The things she needed to do, the things she needed to learn, whether arranged by her family or planned by herself, were all under her control. In Seacliff City, although the White family wasn't very famous, Bianca White was someone countless wealthy scions flocked to. Bianca White had seen many men show infatuation and madness in her presence. But Sebastian Sterling, of all people, was lukewarm towards her, which instantly moved her heart. After finding out Sebastian Sterling's identity, Bianca White had only one thought: to become the woman by this man's side. Whether in terms of looks, family background, or demeanor, Sebastian Sterling was a top choice. In Bianca White's heart, he was the ultimate prize. Thus began the accidental encounters, 1, 2, 3 times. Then she learned that Sebastian Sterling was already married, but the man did not reject her. With something so obvious, Bianca White naturally didn't feel she would be deterred by mere morality. Later, she became the female companion Sebastian Sterling took out, the woman who stayed by his side for more than 2 years, the reason Sebastian Sterling refused to go home. Bianca White had thought that the day she would legitimately enter his household was not far off. But the scene that had occurred at the Sterling home not long ago, the man's cold expression, still made her uneasy. She raised her hand to her lower abdomen, feeling slightly calmer. No matter what, she didn't believe Sebastian Sterling could be hard-hearted towards his own child. Besides, Phoebe Ashton was already dead. At this moment, a servant approached and said to Bianca White, Miss White, President Sterling has arrived at the door. Please meet him in the living room. Darling is here. Bianca White stood up, a joyful smile on her face, and then hurried towards the living room. Chapter 18. Cold-hearted darling, Bianca White rushed into the living room, calling out. Her voice carried joy, yet also a hint of caution. Sebastian Sterling looked up, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. Isn't there a child in your belly, running so fast? Bianca White looked at his expression, momentarily unsure of his meaning. Sebastian was unwilling to say more, his tone flat. Between you and me, it was always a transaction. I never had feelings for you. This child, I don't intend to keep it. Bianca White's face changed instantly. Feeling the gazes of the servants in the living room, her face grew even paler. After a long while, she finally spoke, her voice dry. Darling, I know it was just a transaction at first, but now I don't want it to be just a transaction. Can we, just for the sake of these past 2 years? At this moment, Bianca White was no longer the aloof heiress of the White family, but an ordinary woman with a strong reluctance to let go. Sebastian Sterling's excellence was fatally attractive to every woman. Bianca White had been with him for 2 years and had long since stopped looking at other men. Even the most humble plea she could utter. All she asked was to stay by Sebastian Sterling's side. "Darling, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have used the child to threaten you at your home. Trust me this once, I won't do it again, okay?" Bianca White stepped forward, pulling at the man's sleeve. Sebastian Sterling looked at her, his eyes deep but devoid of any emotion. People like him, love was love, dislike was dislike. He never bothered to hide his emotions. His expression barely changed as he said, "Since you know you were wrong, you should bear the consequences of your mistake." After saying this, Sebastian Sterling, for some reason, felt an extremely uncomfortable sensation rise in his heart. He was a little distracted again. He had once been indifferent to Phoebe Ashton, unable to see his own heart, thinking it was weariness. Now that Phoebe Ashton was nowhere to be found in the entire Seacliff City, was this the consequence of his mistake that he had to bear? Bianca White saw that Sebastian Sterling's mind was clearly not on her, and she gained a new understanding of his cold-heartedness. No matter how she schemed, she was just a person who had fallen into love. Her own devotion was met with disregard. Such a feeling was too unbearable. Sebastian Sterling watched the woman before him silently sobbing, frowned, and said, "Didn't you say you disliked crying women the most? You badmouthed Phoebe Ashton in front of me back then, and now you've become her." Bianca White wiped the corners of her eyes, looked at Sebastian Sterling, and said softly, "Sebastian Sterling, you are a man without a heart. Phoebe Ashton deserved to not want to stay by your side, even in death." Sebastian Sterling heard this and remained silent for a long time. In this silence, Bianca White finally realized that the man before her was not someone she could willfully provoke. Her repeated willfulness was merely due to the great interest Sebastian Sterling had shown her during those 2 years, and that interest had vanished completely a few days ago. To Sebastian Sterling, she no longer had any value. Silence allows one to think a lot. Bianca White couldn't know what Sebastian Sterling was thinking. She only knew that her own heart was sinking bit by bit, tightening bit by bit, with no idea where it would stop. Sebastian Sterling pulled his hand free and asked, "How did you know Phoebe Ashton died?" He had kept the news very secret. Even his parents didn't know. Bianca White had said this on the very day Phoebe Ashton died. Sebastian Sterling hadn't thought much about it then. Hearing it again now awakened the memory of that day, and he instantly noticed something was wrong. Bianca White's heart trembled as she looked into Sebastian Sterling's emotionless eyes. Where he couldn't see, she pinched herself hard. "Phoebe Ashton was your wife. She occupied the position that should have been mine. Of course, I paid a lot of attention to her." Sebastian Sterling didn't ask further and averted his gaze. Just as Bianca White breathed a sigh of relief, she heard him say, "Wrong. She will only ever be my wife. Nothing was ever supposed to be yours." Bianca White bit her lower lip hard to stop herself from saying more reckless words. Sebastian Sterling stood up and said, "Let's leave it at that. This manor, I'll have it transferred to your name. Consider it compensation for these past 2 years." However, Sebastian Sterling straightened his clothes. He said softly, "I will also have someone take care of this child. Bianca White, from now on, we are strangers." Chapter 19. Severance. This was Sebastian Sterling's way of handling things. What he should have, he wouldn't let go. What he shouldn't have, he could also ruthlessly cut off. Bianca White watched the man walk out, finally unable to stop herself from covering her face and crying unrestrainedly. She finally understood that, to Sebastian Sterling, she had never been special. Sebastian Sterling walked out of the manor, looked into the distance, and felt a little lighter in his heart. He said softly, "My cotton blossom, I'm already making amends. When you come back, can we go back to how things were?" Sebastian Sterling allowed another part of himself to control his thoughts. Firmly believing that Phoebe Ashton was not dead, firmly believing that Phoebe Ashton was just lost by him. Only in this way could he prevent himself from collapsing completely. He was utterly unwilling to accept the fact that Phoebe Ashton was dead. Regret to the point of collapse, guilt to the point of uncontrollability, he could only let another self occupy his body. Only this self-deception could overcome the pain of losing Phoebe Ashton. This was the first time in Sebastian Sterling's 28 years that he had chosen to escape. He stood by the car and finished a whole cigarette before getting in and driving home. When he bought the house, Sebastian Sterling had specifically bought one closer to the Ashton family. In his view, Phoebe Ashton was a very family-oriented person. But later, after marriage, Sebastian Sterling discovered that Phoebe Ashton rarely went home. Only when she brought him home would they go back together. At first, Sebastian Sterling didn't think much of it, but every time he went to the Ashton house, he could hear the Ashton parents complaining. Sebastian Sterling knew what that meant, but at that time, he genuinely treated Phoebe Ashton's family well. Plus, what the Ashtons wanted was insignificant to him, so he agreed. Perhaps this was the wrong beginning. When the Ashtons became increasingly greedy, Sebastian Sterling became unwilling to go back there with Phoebe Ashton. Sebastian Sterling parked the car and slowly walked into the house. This house wasn't large, but everything in it was of the best quality. Sebastian Sterling still remembered Phoebe Ashton's requirements for the new house. "Seb, I don't want a very big house. It would be too empty, okay?" Phoebe Ashton had carefully said this to him. Sebastian Sterling looked at her expectant eyes, agreed without a second thought, and eventually bought this apartment of less than 400 square meters. The day Phoebe Ashton moved in, the sun was just right. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows and smiled. Sebastian Sterling walked to where she had stood that day and quietly looked outside. Night gradually fell, and the city lights gradually brightened. Standing here, one could see a lot, but at that time, Phoebe Ashton's eyes only held him. Before, besides work, Sebastian Sterling had Phoebe Ashton and Bianca White. Now, apart from work, he only wanted to come back. But after coming back, he didn't know what to do. Did he miss Phoebe Ashton? Yes, he did. Sebastian Sterling never knew that one day he would be caught in such an emotion as longing. He checked the time, 3 minutes past 8. At this time, Phoebe Ashton would be sitting on the sofa, turning on the TV, leaning against him, their fingers intertwined, watching some boring drama series. Sebastian Sterling initially found it novel, but later, somehow, he grew tired of this life. He spread his hands, unable to remember how long it had been since he had felt the warmth of Phoebe Ashton's fingers intertwined with his. Sebastian Sterling sat down on the sofa again. He didn't turn on the lights. The outside lights mixed with the darkness, gradually seeping in, creating a warm yet desolate atmosphere in this quiet space. Sebastian Sterling leaned back on the sofa, his eyes vacant, unsure if he was truly enjoying his current state. But there was a noise at the door. The lights in the hallway lit up first, then the chandelier in the living room also came on. Sebastian Sterling had been in darkness for too long and was momentarily unaccustomed to it, instinctively closing his eyes. The bright incandescent light left his pale face and red eyes nowhere to hide. Margaret Sterling looked at Sebastian Sterling, who seemed disconnected from the world, covered her mouth, and tears streamed down her face. Everyone had underestimated the impact of Phoebe Ashton's departure on Sebastian Sterling. Chapter 20, Serves Him Right, Dad, Mom, Why Are You Here? Sebastian Sterling asked, turning his face away. He was well aware of his current state and didn't want to worry his parents. George Sterling SR walked into the living room, looked at Sebastian, said nothing, and first comforted his wife. Only after Margaret Sterling had calmed down did he slowly speak. "We know about Phoebe Ashton." Sebastian frowned slightly, then his face relaxed. He said, George Sterling SR, carefully observed his expression and said thoughtfully, "Since things have come to this, and there's no turning back, treat the Ashton family well, and you yourself should start a new life." George Sterling SR was thinking that the dead cannot be resurrected. But Sebastian suddenly spoke coldly. "What are you talking about? I don't understand. Phoebe Ashton just temporarily ran away from home. I'll find her and bring her back." George Sterling SR was suddenly speechless. He had thought that Sebastian's previous talk about finding Phoebe Ashton at home was just a lie. But looking at Sebastian's serious expression, the hairs on his body stood on end. Margaret Sterling also finally realized something was wrong. She tentatively said, "Phobes, she was taken away by someone. I know that person. I've already sent people to find their whereabouts." "Mom, Dad, don't worry," Sebastian replied in the same way. George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling exchanged a look, both realizing the seriousness of the situation. George Sterling SR was about to get angry when Margaret Sterling quickly held him back and said to Sebastian, "All right then, you get some rest. Your father and I will come see you another day." Seeing them stand up, Sebastian also felt a sense of relief. He escorted them to the door as he always had, and then said goodbye. George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling walked to the elevator, looking at the tall man standing by the door watching them, their hearts aching. Inside the elevator, George Sterling Sr. sighed, "If I had known it would come to this, why did it happen in the first place? This is his own doing, serves him right." Although he said that, there was still worry on George Sterling Sr.'s face. Margaret Sterling made a decisive decision: call Seb's secretary. Have him find a way to take Seb for a checkup. Once we have the results, we'll know what to do. George Sterling Sr. hesitated and said, "Should we get someone else to do this? If Seb really is. It wouldn't be good if outsiders found out." George Sterling Sr. was reluctant to utter the words mental illness. He didn't want to attach this label to his own son. Margaret Sterling patted him and said angrily, "What time is it now? Seb's secretary probably knows more about his affairs than we do. If he had any ulterior motives, could he have stayed by Seb's side for so long?" With a ding, the elevator doors opened. George Sterling Sr. nodded silently. Thus, when Sebastian Sterling went to work the next day, his schedule had an added item: a physical examination. He looked at Arthur Finch and asked coldly, "I remember I just had a physical 2 months ago." Facing the man's cold gaze, Finch remained as steady as a mountain. "President Sterling, this was scheduled by you last month as one of the employee benefits. This hospital is also one we've invested in." With that explanation, Sebastian Sterling didn't press further and lowered his head to attend to other matters. Seeing this, Finch felt a sigh of relief, while also becoming more certain of George Sterling Sr.'s words. Previously, given Sebastian Sterling's keen intuition, he would definitely have noticed something was amiss. But now, he didn't ask anything. Finch didn't harbor any other thoughts. What Sebastian Sterling had given him was not just a high salary, but also faith. Once this hurdle was overcome, everything would be fine. Finch exited the office, took out his phone, and replied to George Sterling Sr.'s message. Chapter 21. The cold night weather in the past are now, Sebastian Sterling rarely showed his face in front of grassroots employees. When he appeared in the hospital corridor, many who had never seen him were somewhat surprised. As the president of a conglomerate and Seacliff City's famous top-eligible bachelor, how could he look so haggard? Sebastian Sterling ignored these gazes and said to Arthur Finch, "What kind of checkup is it?" Finch replied, "President Sterling, your doctor is already scheduled. On the 7th floor." What Finch didn't say was that this doctor was found by George Sterling Sr. and seemed to specialize in psychology, and George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling were already waiting in a room on the 7th floor. Sebastian Sterling, unsuspecting, nodded and stepped into the elevator. The elevator's fluorescent light shone on his expressionless face, giving him an almost unearthly stillness. The elevator doors slowly closed. Only then did Finch go to arrange matters related to the employee physical examinations. There weren't as many people on the 7th floor as downstairs. Sebastian Sterling strode out of the elevator. He suddenly remembered that Phoebe Ashton had also been hospitalized a few times. At first, Sebastian would accompany her, coax her, and bring her in. Later, even if Phoebe Ashton stayed overnight in the hospital, Sebastian never came. Sebastian Sterling's face was cold, his heart also cold. Because of his unwarranted desire for novelty, he had pushed Phoebe Ashton further and further away. Back then, when he received an anonymous text message saying Phoebe Ashton had been in a mental hospital, his first reaction wasn't anger, but an indefinable sense of pity. But later, how could he have said such hurtful things to Phoebe Ashton's face? Looking back now, Sebastian Sterling didn't actually know what those complicated emotions were at the time. But he remembered clearly, when he concluded Phoebe Ashton was mentally ill, the expression on the woman's face was vacant and desperate. Sebastian Sterling sighed, pushing the matter of the physical examination to the back of his mind. His heart empty, he sat down on a bench in the corridor, staring ahead, no one knowing what he was thinking. Soon, a young nurse walked over and asked, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Sebastian Sterling?" Sebastian Sterling looked up and acknowledged. The young nurse was startled by his expression. Then, remembering George Sterling Sr.'s words, she said, "Doctor." Stone has been waiting for you for a long time. Please come this way with me." Sebastian Sterling stood up, his whole demeanor showing a submissiveness that didn't match his usual aura. The young nurse breathed a sigh of relief. When she first saw Sebastian Sterling, she knew he was not ordinary. That aura of someone long accustomed to being in a high position was not something an ordinary person could feign. She was still thinking about what to say if Sebastian Sterling didn't go with her, but she hadn't expected it to be so simple. After leading Sebastian Sterling to room 703, the young nurse left. Sebastian Sterling pushed open the door. Inside, there was only a middle-aged man, wearing glasses, looking very refined. The middle-aged man smiled, stood up, extended his hand, and said, "Mr. Sterling, is it? I am Dr. Randolph Stone, your attending physician." Sebastian Sterling frowned at him, then after a moment, reached out and shook his hand. Dr. Stone smiled. After Sebastian Sterling sat down, he said, "Mr. Sterling, then let's begin." 2 hours later, George Sterling SR walked out from the adjoining room. Looking at Sebastian Sterling sleeping on the hospital bed, he said in a low voice, "Dr. Stone, is it done?" Dr. Stone picked up a wet wipe to wipe the sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Yes. I must say, Mr. Sterling is one of the few individuals with strong willpower I've ever met. It took some effort, but those things he shouldn't remember, he has ultimately forgotten." George Sterling SR was greatly relieved and shook Dr. Stone's hand vigorously. Margaret Sterling sat down beside Sebastian Sterling and gently pressed his brow. She said in her heart, "Phobes, don't blame me. With Seb like this, forgetting is the only way." Dr. Stone composed himself and instructed George Sterling SR, "When Mr. Sterling wakes up, he might still have some vague memories, but it won't be a major issue. Just don't let him see anything related to Miss Ashton from the past. Otherwise, there's a high probability it will break through the memory barrier I've set for him, and he'll remember everything." George Sterling SR nodded repeatedly, called over Arthur Finch, who was waiting at the door, and repeated the doctor's words. He said, "Thank you for today. In the future, we'll have to rely on you to look after him more." Finch bowed his head. "Mr. Sterling SR, I will." Chapter 22, Investigation. At 8:30 p.m., Sebastian Sterling woke up from his deep sleep. He opened his eyes to an unfamiliar environment, and vigilance instantly flashed in his eyes. Turning his head, he saw his parents sitting nearby, talking in low voices. A momentary confusion flickered in Sebastian's eyes. He asked, "Mom, Dad, this is George Sterling SR." And Margaret Sterling's gazes instantly turned to him. Margaret Sterling quickly walked to his side, grabbed his hand, and said, "Seb, you're awake? I told you not to work so hard. Look at you, you can even fall asleep from exhaustion during a physical." Sebastian lowered his eyes, seemingly caught in some sort of dilemma. When he looked up again, his eyes were clear. He smiled faintly and said, "I know I've made Mom and Dad worry." George Sterling SR observed his condition for a long time without speaking. Only when he was sure his expression was normal did he feel relieved. George Sterling SR said, "You're not made of iron. How about this, go home and rest for a few days first, okay?" Sebastian thought for a moment and agreed without objection. On the way back, George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling quietly watched Sebastian. Afraid he would say something like wanting to go back to the home he shared with Phoebe Ashton. Fortunately, Sebastian remained silent until the car stopped at the old family home. After getting out of the car, Sebastian even said, "It's been a long time since I've been back. I'll spend more time with Mom and Dad this time." Margaret Sterling smiled and said okay. Then she heard Sebastian say, "The apartment next to the company still needs to be cleaned. Mom, Dad, please arrange it later." Seeing him like this, George Sterling SR completely relaxed. Sebastian Sterling had indeed forgotten about his marriage to Phoebe Ashton. His memory even seemed to have stopped before he was married. "All right, I'll have someone clean it," George Sterling SR said. While Sebastian was in the living room talking with Margaret Sterling, he went to the study, dialed Arthur Finch's number, explained the situation, and finally said, "Have someone immediately clean up the apartment next to the company. Arrange it according to how it used to be." Finch on the other end agreed, then, flipping through his emails, said, "Mr. Sterling SR, there's one more thing. We've made some headway regarding what happened to Miss Ashton in prison. Do you need me to report it to you?" George Sterling SR was stunned for a moment, then a coldness identical to Sebastian's flashed in his aged eyes. "You investigate this matter. Don't miss any details. Phoebe Ashton was my daughter-in-law. The cause of her death must be clarified. I will not let anyone get away with it." Finch replied, "Yes, Mr. Sterling SR, I will compile a file and email it to you shortly." George Sterling SR agreed and then hung up the phone. He didn't go out but sat in the study, thinking about matters related to Phoebe Ashton. The Ashton family definitely needed to be appeased. No one from the Ashton family should appear before Sebastian Sterling. It was said that the Ashton family had been having some trouble recently. George Sterling SR dialed his assistant's number. "Go tell the Ashton family that from now on, if they have any issues, they should find you. They are not to bother the young master anymore. Also, any requests made by the Ashton family, as long as they don't violate principles, can be agreed to." Although the assistant found it somewhat inexplicable, he still agreed. After George Sterling SR had arranged everything, he finally went downstairs. Sebastian Sterling was sitting in the living room, with cut fruit placed in front of him, listening attentively to Margaret Sterling. Everything was just as it had been before. George Sterling SR stood on the stairs and watched for a long time, sighing inwardly, hoping that nothing would disrupt this hard-won peace. After the family finished their meal, Sebastian Sterling's phone rang. A young man's voice came from the other end. "Seb, let's get together tonight." Sebastian had it on speakerphone and didn't object, simply agreeing. Unexpectedly, the person on the phone said in surprise, Well, young Master Sterling is so agreeable this time. Not afraid of the wife anymore?" The Sterling family's living room instantly fell silent. Chapter 23. Existence. George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling both looked at Sebastian Sterling, their hearts suddenly feeling as if they were being lifted by something. Sebastian, however, just frowned slightly, his tone carrying a hint of indifference. "What nonsense are you talking about? Send me the address." With that, he hung up the phone. George Sterling SR and Margaret Sterling relaxed, but still had some concerns, so they said, "Seb, you should rest well recently." Sebastian didn't mind, his tone also very gentle. "Mom, Dad, I know what I'm doing." The two couldn't say much more. They couldn't interfere with Sebastian's business friends, nor could they recognize all of them at once. Tonight was destined to be a night of anxiety. Watching Sebastian go out, Margaret Sterling said to George Sterling SR, "Old man, what do you make of this?" George Sterling SR shook his head and said, "Nothing should happen. We've done everything we can. The rest is up to fate." George Sterling SR had great faith in Dr. Randolph Stone. He didn't think this internationally renowned psychologist couldn't handle a mere segment of Sebastian's memory. Sebastian drove his Bentley to the location, handed the keys to the valet, and strode into the club. He was a completely different man from the dejected figure of a few days ago. It was as if Seacliff City's youngest conglomerate leader had returned. The moment Sebastian stepped into the private room, his old friends all gathered around. It was Jasper York who had called him. They had only exchanged a few words on the phone, and Jasper hadn't paid much attention to what Sebastian said, just assuming he didn't want to mention Phoebe Ashton. Friends rarely got together, so they couldn't bring up any downer topics, and thus didn't mention it again. Besides, apart from being brought out by Sebastian a few times initially, Phoebe Ashton had never been seen again. Presumably, having tasted the bitterness of the besieged city of marriage, Sebastian was unwilling to say more. Before Sebastian arrived, Jasper had already given his friends a heads up. They were all tactful and didn't bring up the topic. Sebastian sat on the sofa in the private room. An admiring girl leaned over, but received only a cold glance from him and stopped in her tracks. Jasper York smiled and leaned in, saying, "Our young Master Sterling is still so chaste." Towards his friend, Sebastian's expression softened. He glanced at him and said, "This is called maintaining one's integrity. Don't use words you don't understand. For whom would I remain chaste?" As soon as these words were spoken, Jasper finally sensed something was off. The Sebastian before him would have sneered, "Chaste? Phoebe Ashton isn't worth that from me." Sebastian's current behavior was as if Phoebe Ashton had never existed. Jasper suspected this in his heart, but didn't probe too deeply. In any case, something he didn't know must have happened to Sebastian. It seemed he would have to find an opportunity to visit the Sterling parents. In their circle, friends were a rare commodity. Moreover, Sebastian Sterling was an outstanding individual recognized by all the prominent families. Being with him meant fewer lectures at home. The group played until late at night before heading back. Sebastian called Margaret Sterling. He was about to say he wasn't coming home tonight when he heard Margaret Sterling say, "Seb, I happen to be unable to sleep tonight. I'm still awake. Mom hasn't seen you in a long time. You should come back and sleep here." Since Margaret Sterling had said so, Sebastian didn't say anything more. Because he had drunk a little, he called for a designated driver from the hotel and gave the address of the old family home. Sitting in the car, Sebastian looked out the window, inexplicably feeling a little empty. It was as if, at this moment, he should be going somewhere else. This feeling was very unpleasant, but Sebastian's expression remained unchanged. A minute later, he withdrew his gaze and leaned back against the seat, closing his eyes to rest. That feeling still lingered in his heart, coiling around him bit by bit, making him extremely uncomfortable. The car stopped at the old family home. Sebastian pushed open the car door, suppressed all his emotions, and strode inside. Margaret Sterling was in the living room. Seeing him return, she quickly stood up. As she got closer, she smelled the alcohol on Sebastian. Margaret Sterling complained, "Why did you drink so much again? It's not good for your health." Sebastian forced a smile and said, "Mom, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to bed first." Margaret Sterling nodded, watching him walk into the bedroom before finally letting out a sigh of relief. Returning to her bedroom, Margaret Sterling said to George Sterling Sr., "Nothing happened." George Sterling Sr. also felt relieved, and the two of them went to sleep. The night passed without incident. The next morning, the servant said Sebastian had already gone out for a morning run. Margaret Sterling busied herself arranging breakfast, all of Sebastian's favorite foods. 40 minutes later, Sebastian returned, freshened up, and sat down at the dining table. A strange feeling welled up in his heart. He subconsciously asked, "Mom, why are you being so nice to me? It's not another young lady from some family you want me to meet, is it?" Margaret Sterling was stunned. She looked at Sebastian, saw he was just casually teasing, and then smiled. "You rascal, what are you thinking? You're so old now, who would still want to send their daughter over?" Sebastian was non-committal, scrolling through company documents on his phone. It seemed he hadn't rested well in a long time. Such leisurely days felt very distant. The dark circles under Sebastian's eyes had faded considerably, indicating a good night's sleep. Chapter 24. Resolute after breakfast, Sebastian Sterling received a call. Someone invited him to go horse riding. He freshened up and went out. Not long after he left, Jasper York paid a visit. He was very polite but also very direct. "Uncle, Auntie, I'm Seb's friend. I saw him last night and he seemed a bit off. I wanted to ask if something happened." George Sterling Sr. glanced at him and asked, "You are Jasper York, son of David York?" Jasper York didn't deny it. George Sterling Sr. said, "Your father is an old friend of mine. I didn't expect that after so long without contact, you'd be so grown up. Since you're close with Seb, it's not impossible for you to know." Half an hour later, Jasper York walked out of the Sterling house, his eyes still showing some shock. After this day, all the prominent families in Seacliff City knew that Sebastian Sterling was single again. As for the Ashton family, they were under the protection of the Sterling family. The reasons for this were left for others to speculate, but no one would ever again mention that so-called ex-wife in front of Sebastian Sterling. A month later, George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling completely set their minds at ease. Things had finally calmed down, and George Sterling Sr. also began to fully investigate Phoebe Ashton's matter. And at this moment, on the other side of the ocean, Phoebe Ashton, who was supposed to be dead, slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the distant horizon, dazed for a while before getting out of bed. Phoebe Ashton picked up a pen and drew a red circle on the calendar. A month. It had been so long since she left Seacliff City. Sebastian Sterling still hadn't found her. Or rather, he didn't want to find her. Either way, it could no longer cause any emotional ripples for Phoebe Ashton. When she was ruthlessly thrown into prison by that man, 3 years of marriage, 10 years of obsession, had vanished into thin air. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Liam Linden's voice came through. "Phobes, are you awake?" Phoebe Ashton looked at herself in the mirror, then went to open the door, revealing a faint smile. "How are you always up earlier than me?" Phoebe Ashton said. Liam Linden looked at her, his eyes full of doting affection. He wanted to reach out and smooth the hair that was sticking up on her head from just waking up, but then thought of something and forcibly lowered his hand. He said softly, "I always wake up earlier than you. By the way, the doctor will be here in half an hour. You should wash up and eat breakfast quickly." Phoebe Ashton frowned and said, "Liam, don't waste your effort. My illness, it doesn't need to be treated." Liam Linden, who had been all smiles, heard this, and an unprecedented resolution appeared on his face. "Phobes, I'm telling you this one last time. The diagnosis you received from your doctor back home was not accurate. Grandma Zhao was able to live to a ripe old age, and so can you." The Grandma Zhao Liam Linden mentioned was Phoebe Ashton's maternal grandmother. Phoebe Ashton didn't speak, just lowered her head, looking at the pattern on the door frame as if in silent protest. Liam Linden was always helpless when it came to her. Outside, he could be a resourceful Chinese-American businessman, but at this moment, he could only soften his attitude and coax her gently. "Phobes, since I was 17, I've known I can't live without you. I used all my connections to get you out of prison just so you could live well by my side. Do you understand?" Liam Linden understood that his obsession with Phoebe Ashton was just like Phoebe Ashton's obsession with Sebastian Sterling. After so many years, he finally had Phoebe Ashton by his side. How could he allow her to leave so easily? Even if it meant giving up everything, he had to keep Phoebe Ashton. Phoebe Ashton had no choice. She had never been good at refusing others' kindness and was grateful for it. She could only nod lightly. Only then did Liam Linden smile. "Then you wash up first. I'll wait for you downstairs." Phoebe Ashton nodded, watched him turn and leave, then closed the door. She walked to the bedside and picked up the phone on the nightstand. Swiping open the screen, the face that met her eyes was unmistakably Sebastian Sterling's. Chapter 25. The result: this had been her wallpaper for many years, and for a moment, she hadn't changed it. Phoebe Ashton's fingers tapped on the screen. It took a few minutes before she locked the phone, put it aside, and then went to wash up. The moment the Dr. Liam Linden had arranged, Dr. Michael Adams, arrived, Phoebe Ashton had also just finished breakfast. "Miss Ashton, Mr. Linden, good morning." The blonde, blue-eyed doctor greeted them in fluent Mandarin. Phoebe Ashton smiled at him. Dr. Adams looked at her and said, "Miss Ashton, your complexion has improved a lot." Hearing this, Liam Linden also subconsciously looked at Phoebe Ashton's face, his eyes shining with satisfaction. Phoebe Ashton said softly, "Dr. Adams, let's start the examination." For Phoebe Ashton's illness, Liam Linden had long since set up an examination room in his house. Watching them go in, a gentle and hopeful light appeared in his eyes. While waiting, Liam Linden took out his phone, opened the photo album, and looked through his past with Phoebe Ashton, bit by bit. 12 years ago, Liam Linden was just an orphan in a small mountain village without parents. But Phoebe Ashton's appearance brought another possibility to his life. After 10 years of hard work, he could finally be considered successful. But when he returned to that small mountain village, he learned that Phoebe Ashton had returned to the Ashton family. When they met again, Phoebe Ashton was already Mrs. Sterling. Liam Linden had once watched her and Sebastian Sterling coming and going together from afar, the jealousy in his heart almost consuming him. But later, the smile on Phoebe Ashton's face grew less and less frequent. Liam Linden knew his chance had come. What Sebastian Sterling didn't care about, he treasured. To him, Phoebe Ashton was the thrill of youth, 10 years of unrequited love. And now, he could finally stay under the same roof with her, continuing the beauty of the past. Although Phoebe Ashton hadn't agreed to him yet, Liam Linden never gave up. He had waited for so many years, why would he care about such a little bit of time? Liam Linden looked at the photos. His work phone, placed aside, suddenly rang. He glanced at the number, then at the examination room, but still answered, "Well, are there results?" The other side said, "President Linden, they've confessed over here. They said it was instigated by the young lady of the White family in Seacliff City." Liam Linden smiled faintly. "All right, the White family of Seacliff City, I'll remember them. I hear the Sterling family is also investigating this matter. What do you think?" The other side asked hesitantly. Liam Linden's fingers tightened, his voice turning cold. "Use any means necessary. Don't let them trace it back to the White family. Also, that person who was bribed find a way to make sure he never appears in Seacliff City again. Then, what about these people? They're all convicts anyway. Isn't it normal for an accident to happen? Liam Linden spoke cruel words, yet as calmly as if discussing the weather. The other side said they understood and hung up. Before the line disconnected, the faint sound of a woman's scream could be heard. Liam Linden put down his phone, his fingers interlaced. He thought to himself, "Phobes, no one can hurt you. And all you need to remember is that all your suffering comes from Sebastian Sterling. That's enough." Over these years, Liam Linden had climbed up from the bottom, step by step, employing many ruthless tactics. But towards Phoebe Ashton, he was never willing to show this side. He just wanted to always be the only person in Phoebe Ashton's heart who had helped her. Even if Sebastian Sterling hadn't directly caused the events in prison, if it wasn't for his missteps, how would his phobes have suffered all that? "Liam, what's wrong?" As Phoebe Ashton stepped out of the examination room, she sensed the low pressure from the man sitting on the sofa and couldn't help asking. Only then did Liam Linden snap back to reality. He looked over and shook his head. He smiled. "Nothing, just work matters." Then he looked at Dr. Adams and asked, "How is it?" Dr. Adams looked at the examination report in his hand, his eyes filled with excitement. "President Linden, judging from the report, Miss Ashton's condition is gradually improving. With medication, there's no possibility of her dying." Liam Linden's emotions surged. He subconsciously reached for Phoebe Ashton's hand, but she deftly avoided it. He paused for a moment, said nothing, just looked at Phoebe Ashton and said, "You see, I told you long ago, anything is possible in this world. You used your illness as an excuse to refuse me before. So are you willing to give me a chance now? Phobes, I'm serious." Chapter 26. Stirrings of the heart. Phoebe Ashton frowned slightly and said softly, "Liam, I don't want to talk about this right now." "All right, I'll wait until the day you give me an answer." Liam Linden wasn't anxious, his eyes full of determination. And Phoebe Ashton, standing to the side, had a complex expression on her face when he wasn't looking, but it quickly returned to normal. Liam Linden had his own business here. In the afternoon, he went out, instructing the servants, "Take good care of Miss Ashton." Phoebe Ashton was upstairs, watching him drive away. Only then did she feel relieved. She sat on the balcony, picked up her phone, and looked at Sebastian Sterling on the screen. A hint of nostalgia flashed in her eyes, but then, what surged from her heart was endless sorrow and pain. Undeniably, Sebastian Sterling's existence was part of the reason she refused Liam Linden. But what Sebastian Sterling had brought her, apart from the initial happiness, was only suppressed suffering. Phoebe Ashton didn't want to experience that again with anyone. The past hardships could only be left to time to dissipate. "I can't step into that fiery pit again," Phoebe Ashton murmured, looking at her phone. Towards Liam Linden, she only felt gratitude. But gratitude couldn't turn into love. That was very normal. In her 27 years of life, Phoebe Ashton had never had feelings for anyone other than Sebastian Sterling. But Liam Linden's attentiveness and meticulous care left Phoebe Ashton unsure of what to do. When she was imprisoned, Phoebe Ashton knew she would definitely not survive in Sebastian Sterling's hands. At that time, she truly had a death wish. But later, when she woke up from her coma, she was already on a plane. Beside her was Liam Linden. No one knew how Liam Linden had done it. When Phoebe Ashton asked, he only said, "You saved my life once before. Now I'm saving yours. Isn't that normal? From today on, you will be a brand new Phoebe Ashton." Phoebe Ashton looked at the floating clouds outside the porthole, feeling somewhat lost. A new life, a life without Sebastian Sterling. After a month of adjustment, Phoebe Ashton had barely managed to adapt to this kind of life. But Liam Linden's kindness towards her soon surpassed the boundaries of friendship. Phoebe Ashton could see it, and Liam Linden didn't deny it. "Phobes, my feelings for you, I will let time prove them. Can you give me a chance?" Half a month ago, when Liam Linden said this to her, Phoebe Ashton was completely stunned. She had never thought she would develop another kind of relationship with Liam Linden. Phoebe Ashton was so flustered she didn't know what to do, only saying, "I can't agree to it." Under Liam Linden's repeated questioning, she finally revealed her hereditary illness. But she hadn't expected Liam Linden to find a doctor the very next day to give her a comprehensive examination. Even less did she expect that the illness that had brought her despair could actually be cured. Phoebe Ashton's heart was very complicated. On one hand, she was stuck in the past, unable to move on. On the other hand, she looked forward to a healthy body and a new life. But Liam Linden? Phoebe Ashton's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she shook her head. She would repay his life-saving kindness in other ways. The wind gradually picked up outside. Phoebe Ashton's room faced an open area, offering an almost unobstructed view of the horizon. The clouds in the sky gathered and dispersed, changing shapes bit by bit. Unexpectedly, a memory flashed through Phoebe Ashton's mind. It was when she had just been released from the mental hospital. For a long time, she was melancholic. At night there, someone would bang their head against the wall. In the same ward, there was also a woman who liked to tear open quilts, stuff cotton into her mouth, and even offer it to Phoebe Ashton, asking if she wanted to eat it. When Phoebe Ashton first went in, she desperately wanted to escape. But after being suppressed by tranquilizers several times, she no longer dared to make any sound. Yet she was also afraid that one day, she would truly become one of them in that mental hospital. But later, the village chief from the small mountain village came to see her and told her she could leave soon. Upon further inquiry, Phoebe Ashton learned that the wealthy family who had framed her for having a mental illness had fled the city overnight due to company operational problems. Without pressure from that side, the village chief dared to come and take her out of the hospital. And not long after her release, people from the Ashton family finally came, saying they wanted to take her, their eldest daughter, home. At that time, Phoebe Ashton was very timid. It was normal for the Ashton family to look down on her. It wasn't until Sebastian Sterling appeared in her life that everything began to change. That man took her to see mountains and seas, took her to see the clouds roll and unfurl. Sebastian Sterling took her to the highest mountain peak in Seacliff City. From dawn to dusk, at twilight, when the sky was at its most magnificent, he kissed her forehead. Phoebe Ashton came back to her senses and subconsciously touched that spot. It seemed to still be faintly warm. But then she smiled bitterly. Sebastian Sterling hasn't looked for you in so long. What are you still expecting? And on the other side of the world, in a different time zone, Sebastian Sterling suddenly woke from his sleep with a start. His forehead was covered in sweat. The bedside clock showed the time, 4:45 a.m. Sebastian Sterling simply sat up, leaned against the headboard, and lit a cigarette. These past few days, he had dreamed twice, each time waking up feeling oppressed. But after waking up, he couldn't even remember what he had dreamed about. Chapter 27, Brother-in-law Sebastian Sterling was somewhat agitated. His phone suddenly dinged with an incoming text message. At this hour. Sebastian picked up his phone. Upon seeing the message content, his brow furrowed. Seb, I'm at your club, private room 888, come save me, Sebastian frowned, looking at the name Marcus Ashton on the caller ID. After a few minutes of contemplation, he still got dressed and went out. At this moment, Marcus Ashton stood in the private room, bowing and scraping to the man in front of him. Big T, that car from last time, I don't want it anymore. I can't do anything about it. The man, Tony, Big T Stone, glared and said menacingly, the car I worked so hard to get for you, you say you don't want it just like that? Fine, don't want it. $1 million for my trouble, and I'll let you go. Marcus Ashton was startled and said, bracing himself, $1 million. Big T, can you reduce it a bit? Although the Ashton family was well off, suddenly coughing up $1 million to be swindled was absolutely impossible. Marcus Ashton was very clear about this. Big T snorted coldly and simply ignored him. Marcus Ashton stood to the side, surreptitiously checking his phone, his anxiety growing. Although his parents had warned him not to seek out the Sterling family anymore. But the current situation was urgent. Marcus Ashton had relied on Sebastian Sterling to handle matters more than once or twice. Now, the only person he could think of was Sebastian Sterling. Half an hour passed, and Marcus Ashton's forehead was beaded with sweat from anxiety. Big T glanced at him and said impatiently, you were the one who wanted to buy this car in the first place. Now you don't want it. Either pay up or leave a hand behind. I'll give you 5 more minutes. Think about it. He was in this business for the money. Unless absolutely necessary, he didn't want to make too big a fuss. It was just that the car Marcus Ashton specifically requested was hard to get expensive, but few people wanted it. Now that Marcus Ashton didn't want it, he was stuck with it. Who could tolerate such anger? Thinking of this, Big T's gaze became even more ferocious. Marcus Ashton was almost about to collapse on the ground in fear. He looked at the several tall bodyguards opposite him, and a feeling called despair welled up. "Who are you?" Big T asked, looking at the man who pushed open the door and entered. After so many years in this line of work, he had a good eye for people. This man before him, judging not by his clothes but by his appearance alone, belonged to the very top echelon of society. Sebastian Sterling didn't speak, but surveyed the situation in the private room, then fixed his gaze on Marcus Ashton. His appearance was like a life-saving straw for Marcus Ashton. Marcus Ashton quickly walked up to Sebastian Sterling and said, "Seb, I?" But Sebastian Sterling averted his gaze at this moment and sat down opposite Big T with composure. He said nonchalantly, "You tell me what happened and how you want to resolve it." Big T, without a second word, explained the whole situation, finally saying, "Sir, we're also just trying to make a living. I really can't afford this incident. I have no choice." Big T couldn't gauge the relationship between Marcus Ashton and the man before him, so he could only adopt an attitude of trying not to offend. After hearing the whole story, Sebastian Sterling glanced coldly at Marcus Ashton, his eyes clearly showing disgust. He looked at Big T and said, "The terms of the deal. That car, I'll buy it." Big T hadn't expected such a sudden turn of events and immediately completed the transaction with Sebastian Sterling gleefully. Afterward, the way he looked at Sebastian Sterling changed. Someone who could easily produce tens of millions was definitely not ordinary. Sebastian Sterling had no intention of saying more, only, "All right, you can go now." Big T didn't want to stay longer either. After getting Sebastian Sterling's address, he quickly led his men out. Only Marcus Ashton remained, standing blankly to the side. Looking at the gaze Sebastian Sterling cast his way, he felt a momentary trepidation. Sebastian Sterling disliked him, and even more so, disliked the Ashton family. Marcus Ashton knew this better than anyone. For a moment, Marcus Ashton somewhat regretted calling Sebastian Sterling over, and the man's next words made him feel as if he had caused trouble. "Who are you, and why are you calling me Seb?" Chapter 28. Guilt. Only then did Marcus Ashton remember the rumors he had heard some time ago. It was said that his sister had already divorced Sebastian Sterling, and even the Sterling family no longer acknowledged this daughter-in-law publicly. Since childhood, Marcus Ashton had considered himself the only son in the family. Even after Phoebe Ashton appeared, he hadn't taken her seriously. After all, his parents' attitude was clear. Phoebe Ashton was merely a tool for the Ashton family. Using this tool, Marcus Ashton had gained quite a few benefits. But at this moment, facing Sebastian Sterling, Marcus Ashton was suddenly speechless. After a long while, he finally managed to choke out, "Mr. Sterling, I got your phone number from someone else and saved it. As for Seb, I was just calling you that randomly." Sebastian Sterling stared at him fixedly until Marcus Ashton was about to crack under the pressure. Sebastian Sterling spoke, "I don't want this kind of thing to happen again, understand?" Marcus Ashton immediately nodded. Watching Sebastian Sterling walk out, he let out a long sigh of relief. He wouldn't dare tell anyone about this. But naive as he was, how could he know that Sebastian Sterling didn't believe his words at all? Sebastian Sterling got into the car, looked at the gradually brightening sky, and narrowed his eyes. There were too many things that didn't add up. It was just that he hadn't yet found a place to start. Sebastian Sterling drove to the company. Before entering his office, he looked at Arthur Finch, who was already sitting in the outer office, and said, "Send someone to investigate the Ashton family. Keep an eye on that Marcus Ashton." Finch was startled and subconsciously looked at Sebastian Sterling, asking, "President Sterling, did something happen?" Sebastian Sterling glanced at him, his tone cold. "Since when have you become so talkative?" Finch was stared at by his sharp gaze, immediately lowered his head, and replied, "Yes, President Sterling." Before Sebastian Sterling entered his office, he said, "You need to be clear about whose side you're working on now." This warning-laden sentence made Finch somewhat unsure of Sebastian Sterling's intentions, but when he looked, Sebastian Sterling hadn't remembered the past. Finch had been diligent for so many years. Only the matter concerning Phoebe Ashton could be considered a violation of Sebastian Sterling's wishes. Now, being pointed out like this, A sense of guilt arose in his heart. Sebastian Sterling had already entered his office and closed the door directly. Finch looked at the email he had just compiled and clicked send. Here, George Sterling SR, after his morning exercise, sat in his study reading the newspaper as usual. After receiving a computer notification, he quickly opened the email. He carefully read the email, his brow already furrowed into a deep frown. After imprisonment, she suffered bullying, with no one to manage it. After the incident, the people living with her met with accidents, and the manager disappeared. Everyone who clearly knew about Phoebe Ashton's experiences in prison had disappeared one after another. George Sterling SR knew something was wrong. He sent a message asking, "Then, is there any news about Phobes's body?" Finch replied quickly, "No. Liam Linden is abroad. Our people are still searching. It will be difficult to get any news for a while." George Sterling SR didn't reply further. He closed his eyes, trying to connect these events, but without the testimony of an insider, he was helpless. "Have someone look for that manager's whereabouts. Let's put the matter of the body aside for now," George Sterling SR instructed. Phoebe Ashton was already dead. Liam Linden was also difficult to deal with. It was better to look for living people first. According to what George Sterling SR knew, Liam Linden had lost his parents early in life. It was Phoebe Ashton's grandmother who, seeing his pitiful state, had registered him. No one had expected that this rootless weed would become today's successful person. Even less did they expect that Liam Linden would use this loophole to take away Phoebe Ashton's body. George Sterling SR sighed deeply. Their Sterling family was destined to wrong Phoebe Ashton in this lifetime. Liam Linden closed his laptop, rubbed his temples, and asked the person in front of him, Dexter Vance, "You're saying a group of people from China has already withdrawn?" "Yes, President Linden. They arrived shortly after Miss Ashton did. We currently speculate they are from the Sterling family," Dexter Vance said. Liam Linden smiled. "That's good. The Sterling family should never have any involvement with Phobes again in this lifetime. It's good they've backed off. I can finally take Phobes out for a walk." Dexter Vance looked at Liam Linden, hesitating to speak. He wanted to say that Phoebe Ashton wasn't worth it. From their few interactions, it was clear she had no feelings for Liam Linden. But Dexter Vance also knew he couldn't say this. He had witnessed firsthand how obsessed Liam Linden was with Phoebe Ashton. In the end, he could only sigh inwardly, hoping Liam Linden would get his wish. When Liam Linden returned home, he also bought a bouquet of flowers. As he entered, Phoebe Ashton happened to be walking out with a bowl of soup. Liam Linden strode over, took the soup from her hands, placed it on the table, and said warmly, "Why are you doing this kind of thing?" Then he turned his head, looking coldly at the servant standing nearby. Phoebe Ashton quickly said, "No, I was bored in my room. It's almost mealtime, so I went to help myself. Don't blame them." Only then did Liam Linden retract his coldness, saying helplessly, "All right." Whenever he saw Phoebe Ashton, Liam Linden would recall the carefree times they had in the small mountain village. It could be said that Phoebe Ashton was the last warmth in his heart. "By the way, Phobes, you've been here for so long. Would you like to go out for a walk with me tomorrow?" Liam Linden didn't have the habit of not speaking during meals and asked directly. Phoebe Ashton's eyes lit up. "Can I?" "Of course you can. I've been too busy recently." "Tomorrow happens to be free," Liam Linden smiled. Looking at Phoebe Ashton's suddenly brightened eyes, he suddenly realized that after so many years, the woman before him hadn't changed. Very small things could make her happy. Liam Linden's expression softened even more. "Phobes, I hope every bit of your future happiness will be given by me." Chapter 29, Commemoration. Liam Linden was true to his word. The next day, after Phoebe Ashton woke up, he was already in the living room, ready to go. Faced with his gentle smile, Phoebe Ashton felt a momentary daze, as if that person had also been so considerate to her before. "This is your water, these are oranges. The place we're going is a bit far. If you get carsick, you can try the oranges," Liam Linden said, helping her into the car and carefully instructing her. Phoebe Ashton took the water and oranges and asked, "Where are we going?" "A very beautiful beach. As for how beautiful, you'll have to go and see for yourself," Liam Linden smiled. Phoebe Ashton also showed a genuine smile. She didn't ask further, said thank you, and got into the car. Liam Linden drove quickly, but it still took them over 3 hours to reach their destination. During the drive, Phoebe Ashton kept looking at the fleeting scenery outside the window. It was completely different from back home, giving her a very unfamiliar feeling. Liam Linden talked to her. "Phobes, do you still remember the pomelo tree we planted outside Grandma's yard?" This question awakened Phoebe Ashton's memory. She smiled happily. "I remember it grew so many pomelos back then. Grandma was so happy and even planned to make pomelo candy for us." As she smiled, Phoebe Ashton's expression suddenly dimmed. But later, they never got to eat the pomelo candy, because the village children stole all the pomelos during the night, and Grandma didn't live to see the pomelos grow again the next year. Liam Linden engaged the cruise control, reached out a hand to pat Phoebe Ashton, and comforted her. "Don't think about unhappy things. I didn't say this to make you unhappy." Phoebe Ashton looked up and gazed outside. "I know, I just feel it's a pity." And she also missed the old woman who had made so many delicious things for her. Liam Linden pursed his lips, thought for a moment, and said, "Why don't we commemorate Grandma in a different way? You could open a small shop and make the things Grandma used to make. People here are quite keen on these things." Phoebe Ashton's eyes lit up. She asked, "Can I?" Seeing her mood improve, Liam Linden nodded emphatically. "Of course you can. I'll find a good shop for you. You just have to wait to be the little boss." Phoebe Ashton thought about the little snacks her grandmother used to make, and anticipation also appeared in her eyes. The two talked about other things, and finally, the coastline gradually came into view. Phoebe Ashton had never seen such beautiful scenery. They arrived in the mid-afternoon. The weather was fine. The blue sea surface rose with waves of white foam. In the distance, the horizon seemed to be merging with the sky. Phoebe Ashton drew closer. The sea breeze caressed her face, carrying a somewhat salty, damp scent. It was a beautiful view, yet it evoked a different feeling in her heart. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt as if her soul had been cleansed. The bitterness and dull ache buried deep in her heart seemed to dissipate a little with the sea breeze. Liam Linden walked to her side and said softly, "When I first read about the sea in books, I thought I must come to the seaside one day. I've seen the sea many times over the years, but this beach is the most beautiful I've ever seen." Phoebe Ashton turned to look at him. Liam Linden smiled gently. "Phobes, what I want to bring you is the best." The sincerity and passion in his eyes almost scalded Phoebe Ashton. The woman hastily averted her gaze, avoiding his. But Phoebe Ashton clearly felt that a certain part of her heart seemed to have moved slightly. Liam Linden watched her lower her head unexpectedly, a hint of gloom in his eyes, and quietly stood beside her. After a while, Liam Linden said, "It's probably around 5 o'clock when this place is at its most beautiful. I know a restaurant over there, near the sea, very suitable for viewing." Seeing him change the subject, Phoebe Ashton also cast aside the distracting thoughts in her mind and naturally replied, "You do look like you've been here many times." Liam Linden smiled and said generously, "I have been here many times, but not specifically to see the scenery, but to work." Phoebe Ashton looked at him in surprise. Liam Linden pointed to the distance and said, "Over there, I worked as a waiter in that restaurant for a long time." A short sentence, yet it made Phoebe Ashton understand his hardships. Liam Linden lowered his eyes. "Phobes, not everyone is born with everything. All my achievements today are built on my blood, sweat, and struggle. I didn't have Sebastian Sterling's good luck to meet you at the best time. But now, I want to try. You don't need to feel burdened. Even if you still think I'm not good enough in the end, it doesn't matter." Liam Linden's repeated advances, forcing Phoebe Ashton to confront his feelings, was his way of doing things. It was also because, after so many years, he really didn't want to wait any longer. Even if there was only a tiny hope, he didn't want to give up. After saying this, Liam Linden stared intently at Phoebe Ashton, afraid of seeing resistance or disgust in her eyes. Chapter 30. 6 months Phoebe Ashton kept her head down, never daring to face him. Such a posture was already an obvious rejection. Liam Linden's face gradually paled, and the light in his eyes dimmed bit by bit. Just as he was about to say something, Phoebe Ashton suddenly looked up, facing the issue directly for the first time. "Liam Linden, for me, I never thought of having another kind of possibility with you." In that instant, Liam Linden felt as if his heart was trembling. But Phoebe Ashton's next sentence was, "But I am still very grateful for your feelings for me." If you insist on trying, then let's set a period of 6 months. If after 6 months I still can't accept it, we'll go back to being friends, okay? Perhaps the atmosphere was too romantic. Perhaps it was for that fleeting moment of heart-stirring. Perhaps it was for that indescribable complexity in her heart. Phoebe Ashton said it as if possessed. After Liam Linden heard her words, a joyful light suddenly burst forth in his eyes. At this moment, he was like a young boy, full of hope. "All right, 6 months it is," Liam Linden said hastily, afraid Phoebe Ashton would go back on her word. He never feared failure, but what was most frustrating was not even having a chance. Now that Phoebe Ashton was willing to give him this chance, all he had to do was seize it firmly and then proceed slowly. Even if he couldn't succeed in the end, at least for 6 months, he would have possessed a fleeting moment of Phoebe Ashton's affection. Liam Linden's happiness was palpable. Phoebe Ashton, infected by him, also smiled. "Didn't you say that restaurant was very good? Let's go over there," Phoebe Ashton said. Then, she took a step forward, seemingly contemplating something, and took the initiative to hold Liam Linden's hand. When she was with Sebastian Sterling, she was always passively accepting. This time, with this new beginning, she also wanted to take the initiative for once. Her life, did it have to revolve solely around Sebastian Sterling? Liam Linden looked somewhat astonished at their clasped hands, then gripped her hand with great force, almost walking with his hands and feet on the same side as he led Phoebe Ashton forward, feeling as if he were walking on clouds. Phoebe Ashton was a little unaccustomed at first, but gradually, she also relaxed. The two walked to the restaurant, and only then did Phoebe Ashton realize Liam Linden had already booked a table. They came to their seats and Liam Linden said, "Wait here for me for a moment, I'm going to get something." Phoebe Ashton obediently nodded. This wait lasted half an hour. Liam Linden returned, placed a jar in front of Phoebe Ashton and said, "Try it, I made this myself." In the jar, pink pomelo candies were arranged neatly, and under the light, they exuded a sweetness even before tasting. But Phoebe Ashton, opposite him, was dazed. Liam Linden looked at her, inexplicably feeling a tightness in his heart. Following her gaze, the smile on his face suddenly vanished. On the restaurant's television, an international news segment was playing. It reported that a certain conglomerate had entered the foreign market with a new type of electronic product. And on the screen, Sebastian Sterling's face was prominently displayed. Phoebe Ashton had thought that if she saw him again, she could remain indifferent, even filled with hatred. But the moment Sebastian Sterling appeared, she knew she was incurable. She would still feel her heart stir and still feel pain. She couldn't escape. She couldn't even tear her gaze away. Phobes, only when Liam Linden raised his voice and called her did Phoebe Ashton snap back to her senses. She looked at Liam Linden and saw a hint of gloom in his eyes. Belatedly, she remembered the agreement they had just made. Phoebe Ashton lowered her eyes, her voice dry. "Liam Linden, I'm sorry. I don't want your apology. I want the 6 months you promised me. You can't go back on your word." Liam Linden was assertive with Phoebe Ashton for the first time, revealing his obsession. "I can't. Liam Linden, I'm sorry. I was too impulsive." Phoebe Ashton stood up, turned, and walked out. Watching her retreating back, Liam Linden beckoned a waiter and handed him a wad of green bills. "Go protect that woman." The waiter's eyes lit up. After taking the money, he trotted off in the direction Phoebe Ashton had left. Liam Linden sat in his seat without moving. He took out his phone and searched for news about Sterling Corporation's movements. After a long while, he put down his phone, pinched the bridge of his nose, and muttered to himself, "Sebastian Sterling, you want to come here and take a piece of the cake, you'll have to see if I agree." Whether for Phoebe Ashton or for himself, Liam Linden would not let Sebastian Sterling get his way so easily. He looked in the direction Phoebe Ashton had left. There was no one there anymore, but Liam Linden's heart felt as if it were being torn apart, pained, and angry. Why? Is your life only about Sebastian Sterling? Why Chapter 31? Returning home when the restaurant was about to close, Phoebe Ashton returned with the waiter. Seeing Liam Linden, she subconsciously avoided eye contact. Seeing her like this, Liam Linden sighed deeply in his heart, walked over, and said in a low voice, "Forget it. I won't force you. Let's go back." Phoebe Ashton suddenly looked up at him, the guilt in her heart almost drowning her. She stammered, "You don't need to apologize anymore. Let's go back." Liam Linden interrupted her, his voice tinged with a sense of defeat. Phoebe Ashton obediently closed her mouth and followed slowly behind him. When they reached the car, Phoebe Ashton noticed someone standing there. Liam Linden explained, "I have to return to the country tonight. These few days, while you're at home, if you need anything, call me immediately. Don't feel embarrassed." Hearing he was leaving, it had to be said, Phoebe Ashton felt a sense of relief. Liam Linden suddenly moved closer to her, his voice low and husky, "Can I hug you?" As if suppressing something, yet also pleading for something. Phoebe Ashton hesitated for a moment, then reached out and hugged the man's sturdy frame. Liam Linden's body stiffened. He nuzzled his head in her hair for a moment, then pulled away just before Phoebe Ashton felt uncomfortable. "All right, go back now," Liam Linden said to Phoebe Ashton. Phoebe Ashton couldn't explain why, but at this moment, she sensed a violent aura from Liam Linden. She opened her mouth and said softly, "Liam Linden, I'm sorry." It was the same words again and again. Liam Linden closed his eyes, his hands by his sides clenched tightly, the veins on the back of his hands bulging, completely hidden by the darkness of the night. Seeing him remain silent, Phoebe Ashton could only turn and get into the car. Only when the car's taillights disappeared from sight did Liam Linden take out his phone and dial Dexter Vance's number. "Bring the car over. Are the plane tickets booked? We're going back to the country. Let's have a couple of rounds with Sebastian Sterling." In Liam Linden's mind, Sebastian Sterling was merely benefiting from the advantage of his birth. The suppressed ferocity from Phoebe Ashton's rejection now erupted completely. After receiving Dexter Vance's affirmative reply, he turned and walked towards the car approaching in the distance. The plane slowly took off. Dexter Vance looked at Liam Linden, whose face had been gloomy all along, and said, "President Linden, you're in a bad mood." He was among the first group of people to cooperate with Liam Linden. Over the years, people around Liam Linden had come and gone, but only he had remained. So when he spoke, he wasn't as reverent as others. Liam Linden wouldn't hide things from him either. "Phobes. She rejected me again." Dexter Vance sighed softly and consoled. "President Linden, if it's something you can never obtain, why be so persistent?" If it were anyone else, Liam Linden would have retorted coldly. But with Dexter Vance, he just shook his head and fell silent. He knew all too well that Phoebe Ashton's entire heart belonged to another man, but he had clearly obtained her promise of 6 months. All he wanted was 6 months. Was that too much to ask? If no one would give him hope, then he would seize it himself, since Phoebe Ashton would change her mind upon seeing Sebastian Sterling. Then he would make sure Sebastian Sterling never appeared before her in this lifetime. Forever cowering in Seacliff City, Liam Linden's heart was cold, but a fierce glint flickered in his eyes. Day turned to night, and Liam Linden's feet touched down at Seacliff City's airport. He said to Dexter Vance, "Let's put our things down first. We'll go pay Sebastian Sterling a visit." Dexter Vance said nothing, just nodded and went to make arrangements. Here, Sebastian Sterling heard Arthur Finch's words, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "An overseas Chinese merchant from abroad?" "Yes, it's Liam Linden," Finch replied. Sebastian Sterling had forgotten everything related to Phoebe Ashton, so even if Finch knew Liam Linden's purpose, he couldn't say it outright. "Then let's meet him," Sebastian Sterling stood up and said. Chapter 32. Astonishment. Liam Linden was an overseas Chinese merchant and not very familiar with Seacliff City. So when Sebastian Sterling had Arthur Finch relay the message to Dexter Vance, he said they could decide on the location. After hearing this, Liam Linden just sneered and said it was fine. That evening, Liam Linden arrived half an hour earlier than the agreed time. He surveyed the place and had to admit Sebastian Sterling's hospitality was excellent. Liam Linden entered the private room and said to Dexter Vance, "You tell me, it's not like Sebastian Sterling hasn't seen me before. Who is he putting on this act for?" He didn't know about Sebastian Sterling's amnesia, much less that Sebastian Sterling truly treated him merely as a businessman to discuss cooperation with. After waiting patiently for 20 minutes, footsteps finally sounded outside the door. Liam Linden put down his teacup and looked over, just in time to see Sebastian Sterling stride in and say to him, "Mr. Linden, you've come from afar. Has our hospitality been lacking in any way?" Liam Linden looked at his polite yet distant manner, a flicker of astonishment crossing his heart. He stood up, shook hands with Sebastian Sterling without losing his composure, and tentatively said, "Mr. Sterling, have we not met before?" Sebastian Sterling looked up, observed him for 2 seconds, and then smiled. "Mr. Linden's reputation precedes him. I've naturally heard of you, but this is indeed the first time seeing you in person." Liam Linden was now unable to reconcile the person before him with the cold and ruthless man he had seen in the hospital room. But on second thought, this might not be a bad thing. Liam Linden keenly sensed that something he didn't know must have happened to Sebastian Sterling. Putting these aside for now, Liam Linden seriously discussed business with Sebastian Sterling. An hour and a half later, Sebastian Sterling walked out of the private room with a rather grim expression. Finch was also somewhat puzzled. "Isn't Mr. Linden here to discuss cooperation?" Sebastian Sterling snorted coldly. "Look at how aggressive he is. Does he look like he's here to discuss cooperation? If he had the chance, I think he'd genuinely want to acquire Sterling Corporation." Finch recalled Liam Linden's behavior and also felt a sense of alarm. "Go investigate Liam Linden's background. Make sure it's thorough, every detail. Even his public personal affairs, you can look into those too," Sebastian Sterling suddenly said. Finch nodded in agreement. Sebastian Sterling opened the car door, got in, started the engine, but his mind was on what had just happened. During the meeting, Liam Linden spoke eloquently, but Sebastian had still caught the hostility he revealed at certain times. This was also why Sebastian Sterling had asked Finch to investigate. In this world, there is no love or hatred without reason. As a businessman, where did Liam Linden's hostility towards him come from? Sebastian Sterling didn't understand, but he wasn't worried either. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. It would be better if he could cooperate with Liam Linden. If not, Sebastian Sterling wouldn't regret it. Sterling Corporation was never afraid of a challenge. Liam Linden watched Sebastian Sterling leave and instructed Dexter Vance, "Have someone investigate what happened to Sebastian Sterling. It's as if he's forgotten everything from the past." A playful smile touched Liam Linden's lips. Now he had one less target. Sebastian Sterling didn't remember Phobes. All he had to do was stop Sebastian Sterling from extending his reach abroad. Liam Linden believed in fate, and he also believed in destiny. He was afraid that Phoebe Ashton would meet Sebastian Sterling again, so he had to nip all possibilities in the bud. On the other side of the coast, Phoebe Ashton picked up her phone. Thinking about her reckless behavior today, she was overwhelmed with guilt. How could she have said such things back then? Misleading someone, giving them hope. Yet in an instant, she had shattered the light in Liam Linden's eyes. Phoebe Ashton had never thought that she too could be someone's light. This feeling made her very uncomfortable. After much thought, Phoebe Ashton suffered from insomnia. The next day, when Phoebe Ashton appeared downstairs with 2 dark circles under her eyes, she heard a servant say, "Miss Ashton, there are several shop locations here that require your confirmation." Phoebe Ashton was momentarily dazed, only then remembering Liam Linden telling her he wanted her to open a shop. How could the current Phoebe Ashton dare to accept such kindness? She quickly waved her hands and said, "No need, no need." The servant looked at her with great difficulty and said, "This was President Linden's order." Phoebe Ashton was stunned. The Liam Linden she knew was always gentle and polite. Why did it seem now that if his orders weren't carried out, something terrible would happen? Phoebe Ashton thought for a moment and said to the servant, "How about this? I'll call Liam Linden about this matter, okay?" The servant quickly nodded and then left with the booklet. Phoebe Ashton checked the time. It should still be sleeping hours back in her home country, so she dismissed the idea of calling now. After breakfast, she felt somewhat idle and started wandering around. Having lived here for over a month, when Liam Linden wasn't away, Phoebe Ashton felt uncomfortable and didn't move around much. She sat on the sofa for a long time again, estimated that the time was about right, and then dialed Liam Linden's number. Chapter 33, Awareness Phobes, What's Wrong? Liam Linden's voice was as gentle as ever, with a hint of sleepiness from just waking up. Phoebe Ashton's heart tightened, feeling a little awkward. She said, "Liam Linden, about the shop you mentioned last time, I've thought about it, and I'd rather not." Liam Linden rubbed his eyes and subconsciously asked, "Why?" "I don't want you to bear too much for me," Phoebe Ashton said honestly. After a long pause, Liam Linden's voice finally came through, "Since you don't want to, then don't do it." Phoebe Ashton hummed in agreement and changed the subject. Liam Linden, I see there's a study here. Can I go in and take a look? Of course you can, Liam Linden replied. Just then, Dexter Vance happened to be calling him. He added, Phobes, in my house you can do anything. I have something to attend to now. I'll call you later, Phoebe Ashton quickly said. Then you go ahead and get busy. After hanging up, she sat on the sofa and breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't know why, but the Liam Linden she used to know felt like a close relative she could be near. But now, no matter how she interacted with Liam Linden, she felt uncomfortable. This feeling was very strange. Phoebe Ashton couldn't explain why she felt this way. After getting permission, Phoebe Ashton pushed open the door to Liam Linden's study. Apart from a desk placed by the floor-to-ceiling window, every other visible space was filled with books. After marrying Sebastian Sterling, Phoebe Ashton had no other hobbies except for reading. Now, stepping into this study, she felt as if she had found her sanctuary and dived right in. Liam Linden was attending a banquet. To establish himself in Seacliff City, he had to socialize. Fortunately, his capabilities were evident, and he managed to connect with quite a few people. Liam Linden turned and saw a graceful figure in a certain direction. His eyes flickered, and after a moment's hesitation, he walked over. Miss White, Liam Linden greeted her. Bianca White turned around. Seeing him, she also subconsciously greeted him. Ever since hitting a wall with Sebastian Sterling, Bianca White had devoted all her energy to developing the White family's business and had surprisingly demonstrated considerable commercial ability. Now, almost everyone considered her the sole heir to the White family. Naturally, Bianca White would attend such a cocktail party, but she didn't know that Liam Linden would actually recognize her. Bianca White looked at Liam Linden and asked, Mr. Linden, you don't seem to be a stranger to me. Liam Linden smiled, glanced around to see that everyone was some distance away from them, and then said, Beautiful women always attract attention. However, the first time I saw Miss White was by Sebastian Sterling's side. At that time, he had just returned to the country on business. He hadn't expected to be contacted by the hospital, much less that the person he had been searching for in vain had become the young mistress of the Sterling family and was being treated so carelessly. Overcome with rage, he naturally investigated. Bianca White appeared in his line of sight at that time. Bianca White's expression changed, and she said with some displeasure, Is Mr. Linden here to reopen old wounds? Liam Linden swirled his wine glass and said, Miss White, I share the same goal as you. In that sense, aren't we friends? Bianca White frowned at him. Liam Linden was very direct. You like Sebastian Sterling, and I want Phoebe Ashton. A hint of surprise flashed in Bianca White's eyes. She sized up Liam Linden and said, But isn't Phoebe Ashton dead? She had arranged for people in prison to make things difficult for Phoebe Ashton, but unexpectedly, news of Phoebe Ashton's death had spread. Liam Linden's eyes turned cold. You don't need to worry about that. Then he said, All you need to know is that Sebastian Sterling doesn't remember what happened before, nor does he remember Phoebe Ashton. You still have a chance. Hearing this, a sharp glint flashed in Bianca White's eyes. She looked at Liam Linden for a long time before saying, What do you want me to do? At midnight, Liam Linden walked out of the hotel with a satisfied smile on his face. He carried a faint smell of alcohol. After getting into the car, he said, Dexter, tell me, when Phobes returns to the country and sees that Sebastian Sterling has already married someone else, will she completely give up hope? Dexter Vance couldn't answer this, but Liam Linden didn't mind, still looking out the window in a good mood. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something, his eyes widened, and he pulled out his phone to dial Phoebe Ashton's number. Dexter Vance carefully noticed that Liam Linden, who was usually unflappable, had trembling fingers. Hello, what's wrong? Phoebe Ashton's sleepy voice came from the other end of the phone. Liam Linden's breath hitched. After a long moment, he slowly said, Nothing, I pressed it by mistake. You go back to sleep. After hanging up, Liam Linden slowly leaned back against the soft seat. It seemed he had overthought things. But in her room, Phoebe Ashton was far from her previous sleepy state. To be precise, she was sitting upright on the bed, fully dressed, even though it was pitch black outside. Phoebe Ashton's hand, resting on the bedsheet, was almost ice cold. She turned on all the lights in the room, but still couldn't dispel the chill in her heart. In her mind, she still couldn't forget the file she had discovered in Liam Linden's study. It was full of photos of the people who had lived with her in prison, and on those photos, large crosses were drawn with a bright red marker. Chapter 34. Leaving Liam Linden? What exactly had he done? Only then did Phoebe Ashton realize she had never truly understood this person. All her memories were based on the past, but time clearly changes a person. Like the Sebastian Sterling of 3 years ago, the Liam Linden of 10 years ago, after being tempered by time, both revealed unfamiliar aspects to her. Phoebe Ashton looked around the exquisitely decorated room, waves of coldness washing over her heart. Liam Linden had risen from an ordinary person to his current position. How many things were buried beneath that seemingly gentle exterior? Phoebe Ashton thought, and finally made a decision. The next day, Phoebe Ashton came downstairs and said to a nearby servant, "Liam Linden seemed to say that if I need money, I can ask him any time." The servant nodded and said, "Yes, Miss Ashton. May I ask what you need the money for?" Phoebe Ashton frowned and said, "It's too boring being cooped up here all day. I want to go shopping in the city." The servant indicated she understood and said, "One moment." Then she stepped aside, made a quick phone call, and returned, "Miss Ashton, someone will be here shortly to take you out." Phoebe Ashton controlled her expression, keeping it unchanged, and smiled in agreement. She knew that things abroad were different from back home. Liam Linden had arranged for people to protect her, but now, thinking about it, it might also be a form of surveillance. But Phoebe Ashton already had a plan in mind, so she didn't resist too much. The servant said, "Shortly," and it was indeed very soon. Half an hour later, a stretched Lincoln limousine pulled up at the courtyard gate. Several tall bodyguards in black suits got out and were very respectful towards Phoebe Ashton. "Miss Ashton, this is President Linden's supplementary card. You can use it as you wish," said the one in charge. They were professional security personnel hired by Liam Linden, with a keen intuition for most dangers. But they hadn't expected that Phoebe Ashton, whom they were supposed to protect, was already thinking about how to leave the moment she got into the car. Phoebe Ashton went into one shopping mall after another, like a truly pampered canary, just out for some fresh air because of boredom. Those security personnel soon relaxed their guard. Finally, Phoebe Ashton found the mall she was looking for. She turned and said, "Wait for me outside for a bit." The security personnel nodded and stood obediently not far from the restroom. Phoebe Ashton strode in and, with extreme speed, changed into the outfit she had bought when they weren't paying attention. Phoebe Ashton knew this was the best opportunity, because so far, only this mall's restroom had 2 exits. Half an hour passed. The security personnel waiting outside finally sensed something was wrong. When they entered after the restroom was completely empty, apart from a few shopping bags left on the sink, where was Phoebe Ashton's figure? "Call Mr. Linden," quickly, unsurprisingly. When Liam Linden received the call, he flew into a rage. "Useless, you call yourselves the best security company, and you can't even protect one woman." Liam Linden, just thinking about the potential misfortunes that could befall Phoebe Ashton, felt his heart clench. Dexter Vance received a text message, quickly walked over, handed it to Liam Linden, and said, "President Linden, Miss Ashton." Seems to have left on her own. Liam Linden looked at the text message on his phone about the supplementary card being used to purchase a plane ticket, his pupils contracting violently. He stared at the message for a long time before slumping onto the sofa in dejection. So, she knew, that phone call was just to deceive me. Chapter 35. Remembering only when she was seated on the plane did Phoebe Ashton's anxious heart finally settle. She had bought a ticket to another city in her home country. Before boarding, she had tossed Liam Linden's supplementary card into a trash can in the departure lounge. Once she arrived, she would slowly make her way back to her grandmother's home. This was Phoebe Ashton's plan. She hadn't been back for several years, but now, the only place that could make her feel at ease was there. The plane slowly took off from the runway. Phoebe Ashton could finally close her eyes and sleep peacefully. It wasn't until the plane landed and the flight attendant came to remind her that Phoebe Ashton slowly opened her eyes. Outside, the sun was slowly rising. Phoebe Ashton blinked, smiled embarrassedly at the flight attendant, and got off the plane. She still had a little money on her, enough to get her back to that small mountain village. At the same time, Liam Linden's men were also intensifying their search for her. Liam Linden fully believed that the only place Phoebe Ashton could return to was Seacliff City. He thought Phoebe Ashton wanted to go back to Sebastian Sterling. But unexpectedly, for 3 consecutive days, there was no news of Phoebe Ashton, and Sebastian Sterling's side was also quiet. Liam Linden had no choice but to have his men continue searching while simultaneously launching commercial attacks on Sebastian Sterling's businesses. What on earth is wrong with this, Liam Linden? Sebastian Sterling sat in the conference room, looking at the fluctuating trend chart, feeling an immense headache. This madman, Liam Linden, even if it meant suffering 800 losses himself, he would inflict 1,000 upon Sebastian. Such actions, such hatred, where did it come from? Sebastian Sterling turned to Arthur Finch. Haven't you found out Liam Linden's background yet? Finch braced himself and replied, President Sterling, not yet. Sebastian Sterling's gaze fell on him and remained there for a long time before he finally said, All right, I understand. You may leave. Looking at Finch's retreating back, Sebastian Sterling felt somewhat irritated. As his capable assistant, he knew Finch's abilities very well. Now, it seemed Finch might have other intentions. Thinking of this, Sebastian Sterling's eyes flickered. He picked up his phone, dialed another number, and said coldly, Find out everything about this Liam Linden. In less than half a day, Liam Linden's file was on his desk. Sebastian Sterling scanned it quickly, his gaze finally settling on a particular name. He subconsciously muttered, Phoebe Ashton? The moment these 3 words entered his sight, a dull sensation welled up in his chest, followed by a stabbing headache. Even someone as strong as Sebastian Sterling instantly had bloodshot eyes. Phoebe Ashton. Sebastian Sterling, not believing it, gritted his teeth and roared out these 3 words. Sure enough, his head throbbed as if it were about to split open. President Sterling, what's wrong? Finch rushed in from outside, his face filled with terror as he looked at the scattered documents on the floor. Sebastian Sterling leaned on the desk, panting heavily. He grabbed Finch's hand and enunciated each word. Tell me, who is Phoebe Ashton? Bianca White had just reached the door when she heard this sentence. She paused, then turned and left. Before Sebastian Sterling remembered, she had already visited several times, only to be coldly rejected by this man. Now that Sebastian Sterling remembered, Bianca White certainly didn't want to ask for trouble. And Phoebe Ashton, in the mountain village, was currently sitting before a grave. Beside her lay weeding tools, and her forehead was beaded with sweat. 3 years ago, when the Ashton family took her away, they had solemnly sworn to send someone to clean her grandmother's grave every month. But when she had just returned the day before yesterday, Phoebe Ashton almost couldn't find the place. She should have known. Her father had abandoned his wife and daughter for that woman. How could he possibly consider her grandmother family? She had been too naive. Phoebe Ashton looked at the sun, knelt before the grave, kowtowed 3 times, and said softly, Grandma, I've come back to see you. Chapter 36. Encounter. Regardless of what was happening outside, after Phoebe Ashton returned to the small mountain village, she received no more news from the outside world. This place was almost isolated, with a culture that was both simple and fierce. Simple, in that on the 3rd day of Phoebe Ashton's return, those who had once bullied her came to apologize. Out of guilt, they even helped her with many things. Fierce, in that the harm they had inflicted on her back then was something a normal person would find hard to understand, yet they considered it commonplace. But the current Phoebe Ashton had thought through many things, had let go of many things, and would not cling to the past, trapped in that fear. Days passed like this. Phoebe Ashton cultivated 2 plots of land herself, and the villagers also sent over some chickens and ducks. This dilapidated little courtyard gradually regained the atmosphere it had when her grandmother was still alive. Phoebe Ashton was very satisfied with her current life. Her phone had long since run out of battery and turned off, but she didn't bother with it. Just as she was almost forgetting about the outside world, uninvited guests arrived. Phoebe Ashton. A male voice, familiar to the bone yet now sounding somewhat distant, echoed from the doorway. Phoebe Ashton stood up, her face devoid of expression, her voice even carrying an icy coldness that kept people at a distance. What are you doing here? Sebastian Sterling looked at the woman opposite him. Though they had only been separated for just over 2 months, to him, it felt like a very, very long time. He had wronged her, had forgotten her, but the moment he remembered her, he couldn't help but rush over. But now, seeing her, pricked by Phoebe Ashton's unprecedented coldness, Sebastian Sterling, for a moment, didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." Only these two words came out. Now, these were the only words he could say. Phoebe Ashton looked at his lowered eyes, a sense of amusement welling up in her heart. "Sebastian Sterling, after I've died and been reborn, you say these two words. Who are you trying to move?" Phoebe Ashton smiled, but there wasn't a trace of emotion in her eyes. Sebastian Sterling knew he had misunderstood too much. Because of his immaturity in that relationship, he had no right to beg for Phoebe Ashton's forgiveness. But after he broke free from that memory confinement, the thought that Phoebe Ashton might still be alive made the throb in his heart uncontrollable. After much thought, besides being by his side, the only place Phoebe Ashton could be was here. With a tentative hope, he came and he saw her, yet he was at a loss. Sebastian Sterling looked at Phoebe Ashton before him, the emotions in his eyes complex and indescribable. But one thing was certain: seeing Phoebe Ashton truly alive, his heart finally settled. He was wrong, and he had to bear the consequences. Sebastian Sterling had never thought of evading this. "Phoebe Ashton, I won't ask you to forgive me, but truly, knowing you're still alive, I'm very happy. I just wanted to see you, nothing else," Sebastian Sterling said slowly. "You'd better mean what you say. This meeting, I hope it's the last in our lives. Sebastian Sterling, I'm doing very well now. Without you, I'll be even better," Phoebe Ashton said, looking at him intently. Sebastian Sterling's heart skipped a beat. He looked deeply at Phoebe Ashton, and with an unprecedentedly gentle voice, he acknowledged, then said, "All right, I'm leaving." Until his figure disappeared from sight, Phoebe Ashton didn't say a word to stop him. Only when Sebastian Sterling was no longer visible did her legs give way, and she sat down on the stone platform where the osmanthus tree was planted. Phoebe Ashton extended her hand. 4 bloody marks on her palm were shockingly visible. She smiled bitterly. "Why am I still so useless, even now?" But she no longer wanted to have anything to do with Sebastian Sterling. Sebastian Sterling's movements were quickly reported to Liam Linden. Almost instantly, Liam Linden realized that Phoebe Ashton must be there. Dexter Vance asked, "Should we bring Miss Ashton back?" Liam Linden pressed his temples and said coldly, "No need. Since she has chosen the life she wants, don't disturb her for now. After I bring down Sebastian Sterling, I will personally go find her." There were some things he hadn't been honest about, but since Phoebe Ashton already knew some things, Liam Linden would tell her everything about his dark side. Without Sebastian Sterling, he didn't believe Phoebe Ashton would truly have no feelings for him. Chapter 37. Confrontation. After Sebastian Sterling returned to Seacliff City, he first went home. Ever since George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling learned the truth, they had been filled with unease. They were afraid that their only son would harbor resentment towards them. But Sebastian Sterling sat on the sofa and said earnestly, "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I've made you worry." Margaret Sterling was so emotional she didn't know what to do. George Sterling Sr. patted his shoulder and said, "As long as you can get over Phobes's death, we'll be at ease." But Sebastian Sterling's next words nearly made George Sterling Sr. and Margaret Sterling jump. "Phoebe Ashton isn't dead." George Sterling Sr. frowned. Just as he was about to say something, Sebastian Sterling took out his phone and said, "She's really not dead, she's alive." On that small, square screen, a video was playing of Phoebe Ashton standing there, looking pretty and alive. George Sterling Sr. was meticulous. He leaned closer to look at the time. It was just from the day before. He widened his eyes and said, "What's going on?" Sebastian Sterling shook his head. "I don't know either. That body back then, I saw it very clearly. But then it mysteriously disappeared, and Phoebe Ashton reappeared. It's all a mystery, but I should be able to find the answer." Liam Linden was willing to make such a great sacrifice for Phoebe Ashton, just to strike at him. So, what was the truth about Phoebe Ashton's death noticed back then, and even the events in prison? After clarifying things with his parents, Sebastian Sterling rushed back to the company. This time, he was fully alert, because he knew that Liam Linden, on the opposing side, was no different from a madman. Correspondingly, Liam Linden soon felt the pressure. His power base, after all, was not in the country. Compared to Sebastian Sterling, he had too few bargaining chips. The situation thus reached a stalemate. Liam Linden and Sebastian Sterling were both incredibly busy every day, neither willing nor able to yield to the other. After finishing today's battle, Liam Linden leaned lazily on the sofa and said to Dexter Vance, "I miss Phobes a little." Dexter Vance stood to the side, looking at the dark circles under his eyes. He opened his mouth but still couldn't bring himself to say anything comforting. He could only say sullenly, "If you miss her, just go see her." Liam Linden laughed, a somewhat childish look on his face. "All right then, you hold the fort for me tomorrow. I'll go see her," Liam Linden said immediately. Dexter Vance shook his head inwardly. Phoebe Ashton knew about Liam Linden's ruthlessness, even if only a fraction. Would she really interact with him as before? Dexter Vance thought and thought, but still felt he should give a reminder. "Liam," Dexter Vance rarely called him this, but every time he did, their relationship became that of friends. This was their unspoken agreement. Liam Linden looked at him, the smile on his face gradually fading. He said, "I know, but I still don't want to give up." These words contained too much reluctant helplessness and also a courage akin to a desperate gamble. Dexter Vance was helpless and could only remain silent again. Early the next morning, Liam Linden left Seacliff City and returned to that mountain village. He walked step by step, approaching the place where he had once lived with that kind old woman. He saw the pomelo tree and also the branches of the osmanthus tree extending from the schoolyard. Liam Linden stood outside the courtyard gate, not moving for a long time. He hadn't felt like this in a long time, calm and at ease. That year, ever since he watched Phoebe Ashton being framed and sent to a mental hospital. And then when she came out, her former cheerfulness gone, Liam Linden had decided to climb up by any means necessary. But now he had climbed up. What had he gotten? Sleepless nights, hands stained with darkness, no longer able to touch the light. This was the price. Liam Linden closed his eyes, feeling a warmth in his eye sockets. The next moment, the closed courtyard gate not far from him opened, and Phoebe Ashton's figure appeared there. Before Liam Linden could speak, he saw the woman who had once smiled at him gently, now with a flicker of fear in her eyes. Chapter 38. Price. Phoebe Ashton had thought that, when she saw Liam Linden again, she wouldn't feel fear. After all, this man had lived with her and her grandmother for several years. Even if he had changed, it didn't matter. But when he appeared before her, Phoebe Ashton's mind uncontrollably replayed those few photos marked with bright red. Like warm blood, it seeped into her body bit by bit, causing the fear in her heart to spread infinitely. Liam Linden looked at her drastically changed expression and suddenly smiled, somewhat gloomy and also filled with despair. "You're afraid of me, Phobes?" He thought he could face this outcome, but at this moment, his unwillingness, his resentment over Phoebe Ashton leaving him, surged into his heart. "Why do you have not even a shred of trust in me?" Liam Linden murmured. Phoebe Ashton's fingers clenched the door, her words like knives. "Liam Linden, I apologize for once mistakenly giving you hope. But can you tell me, what about those photos in your study?" Liam Linden took a step forward, his voice very faint. "They hurt you. They had to pay the price." Phoebe Ashton shook her head gently, "But that's no reason for you to arbitrarily harm others. You are my reason, Phobes, don't you understand yet? Everything I do is for you." Liam Linden's voice rose, finally showing his agitation. Phoebe Ashton was frightened by his ferocious expression and subconsciously took a step back. But it was this step that completely snapped Liam Linden's sanity. He pulled Phoebe Ashton to his side, leaned in close, and said, "Phobes, you and Sebastian Sterling have no future, do you? The 6 months you promised, I only want 6 months, okay?" He was pleading, praying, hovering on the brink of collapse. Phoebe Ashton looked at him, the fear in her eyes fading. She thought, this person before her, no matter how many wrong things he had done, had never hurt her. Phoebe Ashton's stiff body slowly relaxed. Just as she was about to say something, Sebastian Sterling's voice sounded from behind them. "Liam Linden, let her go, that's my wife." Liam Linden whirled around. He looked at Sebastian Sterling, his eyes glinting with ruthlessness. "Wife? When you let another woman carry your child, when you caused her to jump from the hospital, did you ever think she was your wife?" Sebastian Sterling, have some shame. Sebastian Sterling's face darkened. He looked at Liam Linden and said, "This is a family matter. It's not a reason for you to casually lay hands on her." Liam Linden looked at him, neither man backing down. Phoebe Ashton suddenly broke free from Liam Linden's grasp and stepped back. At her movement, both men looked over simultaneously. Phoebe Ashton said, "You too, stay away from my life. I don't care what happens in the outside world. Please don't come and disturb me." Liam Linden opened his mouth and said, "Phobes, I." His answer was Phoebe Ashton closing the door in front of both of them. The two men stood before this small courtyard for a long time, both silent. Sebastian Sterling was upset that Phoebe Ashton would rather say those words to Liam Linden than give him even a single glance. Liam Linden, however, thought of Phoebe Ashton's final, indifferent gaze as if something had been torn from his body. Liam Linden suddenly turned and strode away. Sebastian Sterling, however, stood there for a long, long time. Until night fell, the door before him never opened again. Chapter 39. Shameless to Phoebe Ashton's surprise, Liam Linden indeed did not appear before her again after that day. But when she opened the door the next day, she saw that her neighbor had changed. "Phobes, morning." Sebastian Sterling smiled warmly, but all he received was a cold glare from Phoebe Ashton. Phoebe Ashton naturally had no right to prevent Sebastian Sterling from living there and could only try to control the times she went out. But some people, as if enlightened, were determined to stick to her. Hearing the door being knocked for the third time, Phoebe Ashton just felt that the person outside was excessively persistent. That person being Sebastian Sterling made it excessively annoying. "What do you want?" Phoebe Ashton pulled open the door and asked, looking at Sebastian Sterling standing in front of her. "I want to have a meal with you," Sebastian Sterling said calmly. After a moment of astonishment, Phoebe Ashton looked at the man's indifferent eyes, and anger welled up. She had given so much for him in the past, only wanting him to come home for a meal. But what did Sebastian Sterling do? Impatiently refuse, immersing himself in a love nest with another woman. How dare he say such words? Phoebe Ashton felt she still didn't understand Sebastian Sterling thoroughly enough. At least this man's shamelessness she had never seen in their 3 years of marriage. Phoebe Ashton was furious and slammed the door shut with a bang, unwilling to bother with him anymore. But half an hour later, the door was knocked again. Phoebe Ashton didn't open it again, simply returning to her room and closing the doors and windows tightly. Finally, the outside returned to tranquility. Phoebe Ashton curled up in bed, a dull ache starting in her heart. Yes, she was soft-hearted and nostalgic. But Sebastian Sterling had hurt her so deeply, shattering all her past hopes and expectations. Now, if she were to repeat the same mistake, how could she face her past self? But the next day, when Phoebe Ashton opened the door, she still saw Sebastian Sterling's smiling face. "Phobes, morning." Phoebe Ashton didn't even glance at him and walked straight away. Sebastian Sterling then followed behind her, step by step. When Phoebe Ashton stumbled while climbing the mountain, he even rushed over. But the next moment, Phoebe Ashton fiercely slapped his hand away and said coldly, "Don't touch me." Sebastian Sterling froze, slowly withdrew his hand, but his face remained calm. Phoebe Ashton was going up the mountain to pay respects to her grandmother. Sebastian Sterling followed her all the way, causing her to take several detours. Finally, Phoebe Ashton stopped. She turned to look at him and said, "You promised me you wouldn't disturb my life anymore. I also told you I have no intention of continuing with you." "Sebastian Sterling, what are you trying to do now?" "I want you to give me another chance. Legally speaking, we are still husband and wife." Sebastian Sterling's expression was very serious. "Ha, and what about your Miss White?" "That pregnant Miss White, what will you do about her?" "You can't possibly have the child and then make me raise it, can you?" Phoebe Ashton said sarcastically. Sebastian Sterling lowered his eyes. This matter was a mistake he couldn't escape, and also the greatest harm he had caused Phoebe Ashton. Seeing him like this, Phoebe Ashton felt even more disappointed. She turned her head, no longer looking at him, but also didn't move another step. Phoebe Ashton really didn't want to bring her matters with Sebastian Sterling to her grandmother's peaceful resting place. Phoebe Ashton sat down, as if admiring the mountain scenery, choosing to ignore Sebastian Sterling before her. The two thus fell into a stalemate. Sebastian Sterling didn't know how long this awkward atmosphere would last, but as long as he could see Phoebe Ashton, he felt very content. He thought Phoebe Ashton could sit for as long as she wanted, as long as he was by her side. The Sebastian Sterling of the past had never thought he would have such a day. Nor had he ever thought that Phoebe Ashton had felt this way back then, perhaps even 1,000 times more unbearably. Phoebe Ashton didn't know what this person was thinking, only that the way he looked at her was becoming increasingly strange. Just as Phoebe Ashton was about to lose her patience, the ringing of Sebastian Sterling's phone in his pocket broke the atmosphere. Sebastian Sterling glanced at Phoebe Ashton and answered the phone in front of her. In just 3 seconds, Phoebe Ashton watched as Sebastian Sterling's expression changed drastically. He quickly said, "All right, I understand." Then, he walked over to Phoebe Ashton and directly grabbed her wrist. Phoebe Ashton was about to struggle when she heard him say, "Mom and Dad were in a car accident. They're in the hospital now. Do you want to come with me?" Phoebe Ashton shook off his hand and still looked at him coldly. The moment Sebastian Sterling froze, she was already walking ahead. "Let's go. Remember, it's not for you." Chapter 40, Demon on the way back. Sebastian Sterling didn't speak. Phoebe Ashton glanced at him secretly. The anxiety and worry on his face were evident. For some reason, Phoebe Ashton subconsciously said, "Don't worry too much. Mom and Dad will be fine." As soon as the words left her mouth, Phoebe Ashton pursed her lips. Sebastian Sterling looked at her in surprise, then forced a smile and said, "I hope so. Thank you." Phoebe Ashton looked out the window and didn't respond further. The scenery outside flew by, and the two soon arrived at the hospital. Reaching the corridor, Sebastian Sterling strode towards Arthur Finch and asked, "What exactly happened? How could they suddenly get into a car accident?" The moment Finch saw Phoebe Ashton, the surprise in his eyes was already unconcealable. Hearing Sebastian Sterling's question, he quickly replied, "Mr. Sterling SR, and Madam Sterling went to the Ashton family today." When Mr. Sterling SR came out and was on his way home, a truck forcibly changed lanes. Anger was already burning in Sebastian Sterling's eyes. "What's the situation now?" "When the car accident happened, Mr. Sterling SR protected Madam Sterling. He's currently in emergency surgery. Madam Sterling only has minor abrasions and is in that room." Finch pointed with his finger. Just as Sebastian Sterling was about to walk away, Finch added, "President Sterling, there's one thing. When Mr. Sterling SR was at the Ashton families, Liam Linden was also there." Phoebe Ashton had intended to follow Sebastian Sterling to visit the kind old woman, but after hearing Finch's words, her footsteps involuntarily paused. "Liam Linden, could it be you again?" Sebastian Sterling also stopped and said coldly, "Use all means to investigate. As soon as you find anything, report it to the police immediately." Watching the man stride into the hospital room, Phoebe Ashton hesitated for a moment but ultimately didn't go in. She grabbed Finch and said firmly, "Tell me Liam Linden's address." A few minutes later, Phoebe Ashton went downstairs, hailed a cab, and headed towards Liam Linden's residence. In the room, Liam Linden looked at Dexter Vance and said softly, "The job was done well. After we confirm the news about Sebastian Sterling's parents, we can go back." "Then Miss Ashton, what are your plans for her?" Dexter Vance asked. "Of course." Before Dexter Vance could finish his sentence, the room's phone rang. "Mr. Linden, a Miss Ashton is looking for you," the front desk said. A dark glint flashed in Liam Linden's eyes. "Let her come up." After hanging up, he waved his hand at Dexter Vance. "You can go make arrangements. I must take Phoebe Ashton with me." Dexter Vance sighed in his heart for the 10,000th time, nodded, and exited the room. In less than 2 minutes, Phoebe Ashton appeared in the room. She looked at Liam Linden, who was sitting lazily on the sofa, and asked with a complex expression, "Today, you went to the Ashton family. What did you do?" Liam Linden smiled and said, "You see, no matter how much time passes, you still come to me for matters concerning Sebastian Sterling. You can never let him go, can you?" Phoebe Ashton said sharply, "Answer my question, Liam Linden." Liam Linden's face darkened, and he said coldly, "I went to visit your parents, but happened to run into those two from the Sterling family. We could have coexisted peacefully, but they, right in front of me, affectionately called them in-laws. Their intention to have you and Sebastian Sterling reconcile was all too obvious. So, you decided to kill them. Liam Linden, those are 2 human lives," Phoebe Ashton said, her voice trembling in disbelief. "So what?" Liam Linden suddenly stared at Phoebe Ashton and said, word by word, "For you, I can do anything. The people in prison, I won't let a single one of them go." Phoebe Ashton looked at him and said, "Liam Linden, you're a madman." Liam Linden smiled, his voice eerie, like a demon crawling out of hell. A madman. Phobes, do you want to know what else this madman in your eyes has done? Chapter 41. The truth. Phoebe Ashton subconsciously retreated towards the door, only to see Liam Linden holding a remote control. With a soft click, the metal door made a locking sound. "Phobes, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Talk with me for a while. Let's wait for news about those two from the Sterling family together, shall we?" Liam Linden said. Only then did Phoebe Ashton realize how dangerous it was for her to come alone. Liam Linden poured himself a glass of wine, the translucent glass holding an intoxicating aroma. His expression also seemed somewhat dazed. "Let me think, where should I start?" "Forget it, let's start from the first time I saw you after I returned to the country. I came back to the country just to find you, but I found out you had become someone else's wife. Do you know how I felt then? Actually, I really thought that as long as you were happy, I could choose not to interfere in your life. But later, I found out that wasn't the case. You're too soft-hearted. You simply can't bring yourself to leave Sebastian Sterling, even if he spends the night with someone else, even if that woman is pregnant and stands before you. Phobes, tell me, how could I bear it?" Liam Linden took a sip of wine, looked at Phoebe Ashton, whose eyes held a trace of fear, and smiled. "Actually, you don't have to be so afraid of me. After all, for the next few decades, you'll be by my side." Phoebe Ashton gritted her teeth and said, "Liam Linden, you're dreaming." Liam Linden shook his head, completely unfazed by her words, and continued, "Later, I kept thinking, what exactly would it take for you to leave Sebastian Sterling? I thought and thought, but couldn't find a breakthrough with you, so I could only make Sebastian Sterling give up on you himself." Sure enough, as soon as he heard you had been in a mental hospital, his expression changed. "Tell me, is someone like that worth your love?" Phoebe Ashton's eyes widened. "It was you." "Of course it was me. Who else would tell him that old story? Let me tell you something else. In prison, it was Bianca White who made those people give you a hard time. But just giving you a hard time, how could that make you despair? I had someone alter Bianca White's instructions a bit, turning it into what you eventually saw." Phoebe Ashton looked at him as if she were seeing a monster. Liam Linden was somewhat drunk. He was determined to have Phoebe Ashton. And in this space, there were only the two of them. This delightful realization made him somewhat excited. "Don't be afraid. I just told them to torture you relentlessly, but I would absolutely never let your life be truly in danger. Phobes, you don't understand the principle of breaking and then rebuilding. I'll teach you. Look, after you woke up, you had no love left for Sebastian Sterling, did you? All of that. It was you, not him," Phoebe Ashton murmured. Liam Linden placed the glass on the table with a ding, his tone also turning cold. "Yes, but he didn't cherish you, he had someone else. I just made you face reality. Isn't that enough? Was I wrong? Phoebe Ashton, take a good look. The person who hurt you was him, not me. The truth was so unbearable." Phoebe Ashton looked at Liam Linden, and the blood in her veins began to turn cold. This was a madman, and she, powerless to resist, had delivered herself to this madman. Liam Linden approached her. Ignoring Phoebe Ashton's resistance, he pressed her against the cold wall. "Phobes, I will take you away. From now on, stay quietly by my side, understand?" Just then, Sebastian Sterling's voice sounded from outside the door. "He's in there. Break it down." Liam Linden's expression showed no panic. He grabbed Phoebe Ashton and sneered, "You came quickly. Don't even care about your parents anymore." Phoebe Ashton struggled desperately to run towards the door, but was no match for Liam Linden's strength. She could only watch as she was pulled further and further from the door, towards the exit of another room. When Sebastian Sterling finally had someone break down the door, the people in the room were already gone. He glanced to the side, saw the wide-open door, and immediately chased after them. The air in his lungs was desperately compressed until he saw the two figures moving ahead. "Liam Linden, the police have already been stationed downstairs. You can't escape," Sebastian Sterling shouted. Liam Linden stopped. This was a corridor with very little light. He looked at the blurry figure in the distance and sneered, "Sebastian Sterling, you really are a persistent ghost. Let Phobes go and turn yourself in," Sebastian Sterling cautiously approached. The moment he saw Phoebe Ashton, his heart finally settled. But the next moment, When he clearly saw what Liam Linden was holding, his pupils suddenly shrank to pinpoints. Following that was a wave of dizziness. Chapter 42, thrilling 3 months later. Phoebe Ashton, carrying a thermal lunchbox, walked into the hospital as usual. She greeted the nurses familiarly and then quickly walked into the patient's room. "Do you think President Sterling will ever wake up?" "I don't know. He's been in a coma for over 2 months, and there hasn't been any sign of movement." The once celebrated Diamond Bachelor, now a vegetable after an accident. Such news was truly lamentable. Phoebe Ashton didn't hear their words. She walked into the room, changed the water in the vase on the windowsill, and then sat down in the chair by the bed. On the white hospital bed, the man lay quietly, like an unchanging statue. Phoebe Ashton reached out, touched his chin, and said softly, "How did you grow a beard again? I just shaved it for you 2 days ago. You used to be so particular about cleanliness. How can you accept yourself like this?" Sebastian Sterling couldn't respond. Due to his head injury, his once not short hair had been shaved into a crew cut, making him look somewhat younger. "Dad was discharged yesterday. Because he needs to rest quietly, I didn't let Mom bring him over. You know, he dotes on you the most. If he saw you like this, he'd be heartbroken. I made yam and black chicken soup for you today. It seems you won't be able to drink it again." Phoebe Ashton chattered on for a long time until she ran out of things to say. Then she fell silent, quietly looking at him. That day, Liam Linden's final act of madness was to reveal the explosive strapped to his body. Phoebe Ashton had been so close to him, yet she hadn't noticed when he had hidden the remote control in his hand. The moment Liam Linden pressed the remote, for some unknown reason, he fiercely pushed Phoebe Ashton several meters forward, while he himself quickly took 2 steps back. In those few thrilling seconds, Sebastian Sterling had already rushed in front of her. The moment the explosion sounded, Phoebe Ashton only felt a deafening ringing in her ears. When the shockwave passed, she just felt something hot on her forehead. She touched it. It was covered in warm, sticky liquid. Sebastian Sterling had shielded her in his arms, as if protecting his most precious treasure. Then, this man was transferred from the emergency room to the ICU, and then to this hospital room. The only thing that hadn't changed was that he had never opened his eyes. Phoebe Ashton had heard the doctor's diagnosis, a high probability of being in a vegetative state, but she didn't believe it. How could someone like Sebastian Sterling allow himself to become a vegetable? That would be more unbearable for him than death. Phoebe Ashton gently hooked his little finger and said, "Since you're still breathing, hurry up and wake up. Sleeping like this every day, are you trying to make up for all the sleep you missed before? Your secretary used to come often at first, but later, he got too busy, so only I come to see you. Today, Mom and Dad even told me that 3 months are up. If you still don't wake up, they advised me to divorce you. Your parents are really good people. Sebastian Sterling, can you please wake up? I really miss you." As she spoke the last few words, Phoebe Ashton finally couldn't hold back and buried her face in the man's palm. Suddenly, Phoebe Ashton felt the fingers on her face seem to move slightly, as if trying to wipe away her tears. Her whole body stiffened. She raised her head with extreme slowness, afraid that this moment was just her imagination. When she finally looked up at the hospital bed, she met a pair of somewhat dazed eyes that, upon seeing her, revealed a smile. The end.